questions 1 to 62 in today's order paper, as well as written PQs 1 to 12 and related PQs filed for subsequent sittings. May I have your permission to take clarification at the end of the three statements? And as this is a whole-of-government approach, may I also seek your permission to allow relevant political office holders to respond to clarifications pertaining to their respective areas of responsibilities?
Yes, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran has entered its sixth week and spread across the wider Middle East. Within days of the conflict, Iran effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz. It has also attacked close to 20 vessels. Last month, only about 6 vessels on average passed through the Strait of Hormuz each day, compared to around 135 in normal times. President Trump has said recently that the US has almost accomplished its goals in Iran, but it is still not clear when the conflict will end and when the strait will be reopened. In the near term, the closure of the strait has caused a global shortage of energy supplies, including crude oil and gas. Before the conflict, 1/4 of the world's supply of seaborne oil and 1/5 of its gas transited through the strait. More than 80% of these flows were bound for Asia. Such a severe choking off of supply is unprecedented. It is the worst disruption since the 1973 oil embargo. The fuel shortages have caused a surge in global energy prices. Since the onset of the conflict, Brent crude oil prices have doubled from $71 per barrel just before the conflict to a peak of $141. Similarly, spot liquefied natural gas (LNG) prices have also doubled from $11 per million British thermal units, or MMBTU, to as high as $22. The disruption extends to other key products too, particularly those that use oil and natural gas as feedstock or starting materials. One example is fertilizers. Most fertilizers are made using natural gas, and the Middle East is a key global producer of fertilizers, second only to Russia. Nearly a third of the world's fertilizer trade is shipped through the strait. The supply disruption has led to soaring fertilizer costs. If farmers reduce or stop fertilizer use, crop yields will fall, raising global food prices. Other industries are also affected. This includes aluminium, which is used to manufacture cars, airplanes, and many other products, as well as helium, which is needed for producing semiconductor chips and cooling magnetic resonance imaging machines, or MRI machines. These disruptions are cascading through the global economy. Higher fuel and raw material costs will raise business costs, some of which will pass through to consumers through higher prices. Higher energy prices have also increased transport and shipping costs. Air freight rates between Asia and Europe have almost doubled since the conflict began. This will eventually push up costs of other items, including food and grocery supplies. Rising business costs and consumer prices will, in turn, dampen demand and slow down the global economy. Many Asian currencies have weakened against the stronger US dollar, compounding inflation and growth risks in these countries. All of these pressures could intensify further in the coming weeks. As a small and highly open economy, Singapore will not be able to insulate ourselves completely from this crisis. We must respond with a coordinated, multi-agency effort to cushion the impact on our people and our economy. And this is why we have convened the Homefront Crisis Ministerial Committee, chaired by Coordinating Minister for National Security K Shanmugam and comprising several ministers. We will focus on the following areas. First, securing our supplies, such as LNG and diesel for power, as well as other essential fuel products like jet fuel and motor gasoline. strengthening our economic resilience by helping businesses to preserve their productive capacity and capability, and facilitating their transformation where necessary. Providing targeted help for those most affected by the crisis, including businesses in the energy and chemicals cluster, platform workers, and low-income families, and helping workers with training and employment support, as well as providing households with broad-based help to address cost of living concerns. Minister Shanmugam will share more later on how we are organizing ourselves to coordinate our national response. So, sir, what do these developments mean for our economy? In February this year, MTI upgraded Singapore's GDP forecast for 2026 to 2 to 4% on the back of strong growth momentum seen in the fourth quarter of 2025, supported by robust AI-related demand. Early data indicates that economic activity continued to be resilient in the first quarter of 2026. However, growth in the coming quarters is likely to be affected by the ongoing conflict. While the conflict impacts many sectors, some sectors will feel it more than others. In manufacturing, the most direct impact will be on industries that rely on natural gas, crude oil, and crude oil derivatives as feedstocks. Our refineries have adjusted by reducing their run rates and brought in shipments from sources outside of the Middle East. Downstream chemical firms will also be affected. Some firms, such as PCS, have already declared force majeure due to upstream supply disruptions. Beyond the energy and chemical clusters, higher fuel and electricity prices will also affect a wider range of industries, including electronics, precision engineering, and other energy-intensive clusters. In services, outward-oriented sectors like air and sea transport, as well as tourism, will be affected by higher costs and weaker demand. On the other hand, domestically oriented sectors such as retail, food services, and private land transport will face higher operating costs, including utility and fuel. Taken together, these sectoral impacts will weigh on economic activities in the coming quarters, although the extent remains uncertain as the conflict is still unfolding. MTI will continue to monitor developments closely and will update our GDP forecasts in May. Let me now move to the impact on Singaporeans. As we import nearly all our energy, the spike in global oil and natural gas prices will inevitably raise fuel and electricity costs for Singapore. About 95% of Singapore's electricity is generated from natural gas, whose price is mostly pegged to market prices. The regulated electricity tariff, which most Singaporean households pay, increased by 2.1% to about 27 cents per kilowatt hour for the second quarter of 2026. The increase is modest relative to the spike in fuel prices. But that is because the tariff is based on fuel prices from the first 10 weeks of the preceding quarter, from January to middle of March. That means only a small portion of the recent surge in fuel prices has been captured in this tariff adjustment. Fuel makes up about half of the tariff, so higher fuel prices will flow through to electricity prices. We should therefore expect a much sharper increase in the next tariff adjustment, which will fully reflect the higher cost of fuel. These cost increases will feed through to broader inflation in Singapore. We had earlier forecast CPI all items and MAS core inflation to come in at 1 to 2% in 2026, after inflation broadly eased in 2025. However, the Middle East situation has driven up global energy and commodity prices, which will drive up global inflation. Consequently, we now expect Singapore's overall inflation for 2026 to be higher than earlier projected. If the conflict is protracted, higher inflation in our source markets could also lead to further increases in import prices over time. These pressures will be felt by households in more expensive electricity, transport, and daily necessities. Lower-income households will be more affected as a larger share of their spending goes towards essentials. MES will take these developments into account in its upcoming assessment of the inflation outlook, which it will release on 14th of April. Mr. Speaker, the crisis is unlikely to be over anytime soon, and we must be prepared for its effect to persist for some time. Even more worrying is the risk of escalation, including further damage to energy infrastructure or a prolonged blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. This could trigger a global energy crunch, slowing global growth and pushing up inflation worldwide. This crisis has reminded us again of how interconnected and how fragile the global system is. We need to be prepared for more frequent inflation shocks and supply chain disruptions in a world of heightened geopolitical contestation. We will strengthen our resilience by building up inventories and diversifying our sources of supply, but Singapore will always remain dependent on imports for our supplies. It is therefore critical that we continue to strengthen our partnerships with like-minded countries and uphold an open and rules-based trading system. As a trading nation, keeping faith with our partners and maintaining our credibility is crucial. We must foster the free flow of energy and goods as far as possible. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong has spoken to Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. They jointly affirmed our commitment to support the flow of essential goods, including petroleum oils such as diesel and LNG, between our two countries. PM Wong has also spoken to New Zealand PM Christopher Luxon to reaffirm our commitment to strengthen supply resilience and mitigate disruptions. Singapore and New Zealand concluded an agreement on trade in its essential supplies last October, which is a timely framework to ensure the continued flow of critical goods between our two countries. The ASEAN foreign ministers and economic ministers have discussed and underscored the importance of maintaining stable, open, and reliable global energy supply chains, as well as the importance of minimizing disruptions to the flow of essential supplies, including food. Singapore and 10 fellow members of the Future of Investment and Trade Partnership, or FITP, also issued a joint statement last week, reaffirming the importance of not imposing restrictive trade measures, including export restrictions, tariffs, and non-tariff barriers on essential goods. Mr. Speaker, may I now say a few words in Mandarin, please? 议长先生，这场危机短期内不会结束，所以新加坡必须尽早做好准备，不可以掉以轻心。作为小型开放经济体，我们不可能完全不受影响。外部成本上升，最终会影响到企业、家庭和物价。我们将致力确保能源与粮食供应稳定，加强经济韧性，以应付危机。为受影响最严重的企业、平台员工以及低收入家庭提供必要的帮助。我们也将为工友提供培训和就业援助，并协助家庭应付生活费的压力。现在最重要的是，无论是商家或者是个人，都必须乘坐应对。政府会加强跨机构协调，保障供应，稳定经济，减轻冲击。我们过去经历过无数次的危机，这次我们也要一如既往，坚韧团结，共度危机。Sir, the government recognizes that the impact of this crisis will be felt by households and businesses. We will do what is necessary to support them through this period. Senior Minister of State for Finance, Jeffrey Siow, will share more on our support measures. At the same time, all of us, government, businesses, and households, will need to do our part. Households can do our best to conserve electricity, use climate vouchers to purchase more energy-efficient appliances, and adopt simple measures such as using fans instead of air conditioning, taking public transport instead of driving. Businesses can also conserve energy by tapping on schemes such as the Energy Efficiency Grant and investing in more efficient equipment. Periods of disruption such as this will test the resilience of countries and economies, but they also create impetus for firms to transform, diversify, and deepen their capabilities. We must press on with the recommendations of the Economic Strategy Review, including building global leadership in key growth sectors, such as advanced manufacturing and modern services, supporting firms to diversify and internationalize, and accelerating enterprise transformation through technology and innovation, so that our economy remains resilient and competitive in a more challenging global environment. This also means making our energy and supply chains more resilient, deepening partnerships with like-minded countries, and staying open and connected to the global economy. If we stay disciplined, deepen our trust in each other, preserve our capabilities, and use this spirit to sharpen our competitive edge, Singapore will be well placed not only to weather this crisis, but to emerge from it stronger. Thank you.
The Acting Minister for Transport and Senior Minister of State for Finance and the Coordinating Minister for National Security and Minister for Home Affairs will also be making related ministerial statements. I will allow members to raise points of clarifications on all statements after Minister Shanmugam's statement. Acting Minister for Transport and Senior Minister of State for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister has set out how the Middle East conflict will affect Singapore's economy. I will now explain what the government is doing to support our businesses, our workers, and our households through this period. On the 12th of February this year, the Prime Minister and Minister for Finance presented our largest budget on record at $155 billion. We could not know about the conflict that would break out in Iran, but we could see many uncertainties ahead, and therefore the need to provide greater reassurance and support in this budget. Hence, PM Lawrence Wong announced substantial broad-based support measures, including a corporate income tax rebate, CDC vouchers, and the cost of living special payment. We provided more support for lower-wage workers and households, such as enhancements to the Progressive Wage Credit Scheme and better support for lower-income families through Comlink Plus. We also enhanced USAVE rebates, giving 1.5 times the regular amount, or up to $570 this financial year. The first tranche of USAVE rebates will be disbursed in April. This will help defray the increase in utility bills from April to June. A second tranche of USAVE rebates will be disbursed in July, and this should help to defray the much sharper increase in utility bills from July to September that we expect with the spike in oil prices. 16 days after the budget, the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Iran. The current situation in the Middle East remains highly uncertain. We cannot predict how exactly events will unfold or when the conflict will end. What we do know is that Singaporeans are already feeling some of the effects on the ground. In Singapore, petrol and diesel prices have risen sharply in tandem with global oil prices and are likely to remain elevated for some time. And while the impact has not yet fully filtered through for items such as electricity and food, We have to brace ourselves because we know from experience that this will come. The government is not waiting to act. We will supplement what was announced at the budget with a further package of support measures. These provide targeted support to those who are the most heavily and directly affected. We will also provide broad-based support for businesses and households. And let me go through each of these in turn. First, support for the domestic transport sector. The sharp increase in fuel prices had an immediate effect on the earnings of platform workers, private hire car drivers, and taxi drivers. NTUC has worked with platform and taxi operators on fuel vouchers and fare adjustments, which have helped to cushion the impact. To provide further relief, the government will disburse $200 in cash to active platform workers, private hire car drivers, and taxi drivers from the end of the month. For certain essential bus services, such as those for school students, seniors, and persons with disabilities, the government will provide temporary assistance to co-fund cost increases to enable these services to continue operating without disruption. The respective government agencies will provide more details. Several members have asked if the government will consider reducing fuel or diesel subsidies across the board. We do not think this is the right move. It is too blunt an approach, and it could also be regressive. At the same time, we want to preserve the price signals for consumers to use energy more efficiently. And more fundamentally, as an open economy, we must allow fuel prices to reflect market realities. If prices are artificially suppressed, importers may choose to divert fuel to where prices are higher, and over time, this can tighten supply and leave us worse off. Instead, our targeted approach provides direct support to those who are directly affected, and this allows us to channel more help to those who need it most. Second, let me talk about support for businesses. Higher energy and logistics costs will continue to be felt by businesses across the economy for some time. Our SMEs, in particular, are more vulnerable to sudden cost increases. To help businesses manage cash flow, we will enhance the corporate income tax rebate announced at budget from 40% to 50% for the year of assessment 2026. We will also raise the minimum benefit that a company with at least one local employee will receive from $1,500 to $2,000. The total benefits cap for each company will be raised from $30,000 to $40,000. We will disburse this enhancement quickly, as early as the end of this month. Even as we roll out immediate relief, this challenging period is also a timely reminder for all our businesses to build longer-term resilience against high and sustained energy prices, and we will support them to do so. Businesses that invest in energy efficiency will reduce their exposure to volatile energy prices and lower their long-run operating costs. We currently have an energy efficiency grant which applies to 6 designated sectors. For example, food services, retail, manufacturing, and construction. Companies in these sectors can make use of the grants to invest in new, energy-efficient equipment. We will now expand the base tier of this grant to all sectors and extend this support for another year to 31st March 2028. So that more companies can benefit. Additionally, some companies in the energy and chemical sector have been badly affected by feedstock supply disruptions. Our agencies are engaging these firms and assessing how best to provide targeted support to preserve critical capabilities for our economy. And finally, as a responsible buyer, the government is prepared to share the cost increases directly related to fuel costs for critical government projects where any delays or stoppages will clearly affect the public interest. This includes major government infrastructure projects, such as the Cross Island MRT line and new HDB BTO projects. The DCA will issue a circular with more details shortly. Third, let me talk about support for households. We are tracking the prices of food and other essential goods and services very closely. So far, rising fuel prices have not yet fully percolated into wider price increases across the economy. But given the uncertainty in the Middle East, it is still too early to update our projections of inflation in Singapore or to quantify the full impact on households. But we know the situation has amplified cost of living anxieties for Singaporeans. Therefore, to reassure Singaporeans that the cost increases in the impending months can be managed, we will bring forward the disbursement of the $500 CDC vouchers announced in budget this year from January 2027 to June 2026. We will also increase the budget 2026 cost of living special payment by $200 for all eligible Singaporeans. And this will bring the total quantum of the special payment to between $400 and $600 per person. About 2.4 million Singaporeans will receive this additional payment in cash, which will be disbursed in September. Mr. Speaker, may I now say a few words in Mandarin, please? 中东局势紧张，能源价格上涨。我们理解国人的担忧。政府今天宣布了多项援助的措施，为国人提供及时的帮助。我们也会为最直接受到影响的人士加强援助。例如，德士司机和平台员工将从4月底获到200元的现金补助。政府也会为企业和家庭提供更多的帮助，包括把2027年1月的500元 CDC 邻里购物券提前在今年6月发放。9月发放的生活费特别补助也将调高200元。我们还不知道这场危机会持续多久，也不知道影响会有多大。但政府会继续密切关注局势的发展，在有需要的时候再取更多的措施，为国人提供援助。政府一直以来都会非常谨慎的和负责任的管理国家的资源，先把资源储备好，有备无患。因此，在遇到危机的时候，政府才能有能力帮助人民，不让任何人掉队。不论遇到什么样的危机，只要大家上下一心，携手应对，我们一定能够度过这个难关。Mr. Speaker, the government has put together a substantial first response to the energy crisis caused by the Middle East conflict. We do not know how long the conflict and its economic impact will last, but the government is alive to the situation. We have drawer plans, and as events develop, we can put them into action and do more if the situation calls for it. This package adds up to close to $1 billion in additional measures on top of what has previously been committed in Budget 2026. It is much larger than our immediate response in 2022 after war broke out in Ukraine and caused a similar surge in oil and gas prices. To fund these measures, the government will work within the amount approved in the Supply Act last month in the first instance and seek Parliament's approval for the supplementary budget later on. Mr. Speaker, this is neither the first crisis we have weathered, nor will it be the last. What Singaporeans can count on is a government that is well prepared, builds sufficient buffers, anticipates problems, and thus is ready and able to respond swiftly with solutions. We will always make sure that no Singaporean is left to bear his or her burden alone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Coordinating Minister for National Security and Minister for Home Affairs.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister said last Thursday, we stood up the HCMC, which is the Homefront Crisis Ministerial Committee, soon after hostilities started. At the civil service level, there is the Homefront Crisis Executive Group, or HCEG. The HCEG coordinates across government agencies to anticipate potential emergency scenarios, ensure the necessary contingency plans are prepared, and respond to the impact of any home front crisis or emergency. The HCEG reports to and receives directions from the HCMC. The HCMC is a structure that was formalized after the SARS outbreak in 2003. Its role was set out and explained in Parliament in 2004 by then Minister for Home Affairs, Mr. Wong. Structurally, organizationally, from the time it was set up, the Minister for Home Affairs has been designated as the chair of HCMC. The PM asked that the HCMC be stood up some weeks ago to deal with the current crisis. DPM Gan is the advisor to this HCMC. The key ministries and their ministers all play an important role. We have also brought in newer office holders to complement the team. They will bring additional perspectives as they deal with specific issues related to the ongoing situation. With your permission, Mr. Speaker, may I ask the clerks to distribute Annex A, which shows the composition of this HCMC. Members may also access this material through the PAL app.
Please proceed.
Thank you, sir. So I'll carry on. There are 13 members in this HCMC, and their names are in the annex. Over the past month, both the HCMC and the HCEG have met several times. The HCMC has been looking at a broad range of issues, including energy and food resilience, including supply chain resilience, resilience for other essentials, security developments, both domestic and external, and support measures for Singaporeans and public communications, and foreign affairs and our diplomatic relations. In response to the heightened threat environment, from the security perspective, we have put in place additional measures. ICA has increased checks at our checkpoints upon the escalation of the conflict, and police have also stepped up patrols at areas of concern. We have also activated contingency plans to repatriate Singaporeans in the Middle East affected by the conflict. Flights were organized by MFA and MINDEF. They were executed at short notice and required close coordination between the ministries. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs began assessing evacuation routes upon the escalation of hostilities, given the possibility of prolonged airport or airspace closures in the region. MCCY and MOIS have also been engaging Singaporean residents in the Middle East, as well as key partners, such as the Association of Muslim Travel Agents in Singapore, for Umrah and Hajj arrangements in the light of this conflict. You have heard about the impact of this conflict from DPM. I will highlight a few points. More than half our total crude oil imports comes from the Middle East. Prior to the crisis, about 9% of our natural gas would have been imported from Qatar if it had carried on as per normal through the year. Many other critical supplies pass through the Straits of Hormuz, including helium and aluminium. We can no longer rely on such supplies in the same way. I will speak in a little bit more detail about two key sectors. First, fuel and energy, and second, food supplies. First, on fuel and energy security, since the start of the conflict, several countries have announced export restrictions on fuel or implemented fuel rationing measures. We have not done so far. There has been no need to do so. Global energy majors and trading companies have a sizable presence in Singapore. We are the world's third largest oil trading hub and the sixth largest refinery export hub. These capabilities were built up over decades. It is a result of a deliberate long-term strategy. Today, they underpin our energy and fuel resilience. Because of this, we are deeply connected to global flows of energy, and that gives us access to diverse sources of energy and fuel supplies. So we are able to respond to disruptions more flexibly, and we continue so far to have access to crude oil. And we have been meeting our domestic needs and international obligations for fuels. However, we do not know how long the disruptions will last. As Minister Tan See Leng said a fortnight ago, we need to brace ourselves for a bumpy ride ahead. No one can say what the situation will look like or will be like if there are more serious disruptions and if they last longer. We have secured crude oil supplies from alternative sources, but the pricing is different. We have to pay prevailing prices, which are much higher. Brent crude has surged as high as 70% since the increase in hostilities on 28 February. Singaporeans are feeling the impact in higher prices as fuel and energy costs rise. Prices are likely to remain high even after hostilities cease. Damage to infrastructure in the Middle East will take time to repair. We have already seen damage to large oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, other places. Even if the Straits of Hormuz fully reopens tomorrow, global oil and gas export capacity will not return to pre-conflict levels quickly. In the broader term, we are concerned about broader disruptions to global supply chains, which can affect goods critical to Singapore's economy and essential services. MTI is monitoring the situation closely and working with the industries. As for electricity, we have taken steps to reduce risks to disruption of our supplies to meet our electricity needs. And there are four aspects to this. First, our sources are diversified. Apart from the Middle East, we also import liquefied natural gas, LNG, from Australia, which is one of our key suppliers, the United States, and Mozambique. Gasco was set up last year to centralize gas procurement for the power sector. Gasco has begun buying replacement natural gas to replace the disrupted supply from Qatar. Second, while 95% of our electricity is generated from natural gas, our power plants can switch from natural gas to diesel when needed. Third, and relatedly, we have fuel reserves. These reserves comprise a mixture of natural gas and diesel. Some are owned by the government, some are owned by power generation companies. We are also planning to increase our fuel reserves. It will be costly, but we think it necessary. We have so far not tapped on our fuel reserves, nor have we implemented fuel rationing. The Energy Market Authority, or EMA, also requires power generation companies to have pre-arranged contractual access to additional fuel. Fuel suppliers are required to deliver the fuel to the power generation companies within a set number of days upon activation. And we are prepared, if necessary, to direct the power generation companies to exercise their legal rights to secure the additional fuel. That said, securing the additional fuel by the power generation companies may be subject to force majeure events. Some of the additional fuel may be sourced from overseas and may be subject to supply disruptions again. Fourth, EMA has strengthened regulatory requirements on electricity retailers in 2023. This ensures that they are sufficiently hedged and will be better able to handle an extended period of gas price volatility. The position we put ourselves in before the crisis and the steps we have taken since the crisis have helped us remain relatively stable. Nevertheless, if the supply disruptions increase and if more suppliers are unable to supply fuel or gas, then potential disruptions to our domestic energy and electricity supply cannot be ruled out. However, this remains a low probability scenario for now, though we continue to monitor developments closely. But prices will go up. DPM spoke earlier on the regulated electricity tariff. Even though the cost of gas accounts for almost half of the regulated tariff, this has so far only partially transmitted to the tariff price. If the conflict is prolonged, then we have to expect much sharper increases in electricity prices. The situation has caused many countries to take a closer look at their energy security. I'll make 2 points on our situation. First, on refineries. As I said earlier, we are a major refining center. When countries began imposing controls on their export of fuel, many asked us if we would still be able to supply them with refined fuel products. Some of these countries supply crude oil and other essential products to us. In turn, we supply them with refined products which they need. This creates a mutual interdependence. It keeps Singapore relevant in the international energy trade. And this has enabled us to have continued access to crude oil. Some have also questioned the role of refineries over the medium term, given our green transition. We remain committed to decarbonizing our economy, but as stated before, our path to net zero will depend on technological breakthroughs and sustained international cooperation. For now, the priority worldwide is energy security. Countries everywhere need to keep the lights on. Fossil fuel remains part of the global energy mix because renewable energy is not yet able to meet all of the demand. In that context, Singapore will continue to play our role as a refining hub. And we will continue to work with our refineries to improve their energy efficiency and reduce their carbon footprint. Second, we must continue to press on with our efforts to diversify our sources of energy. We have made good progress on domestic solar energy deployment. We have already achieved our 2030 target of 2 gigawatt peak in 2025. At the COS debate in March, the government announced that it would raise the target to 3 gigawatt peak. In the near term, we will continue to deploy solar energy domestically and pursue electricity imports from the region. In the medium to long term, we are assessing other sources of energy to diversify our fuel mix. One potential source is nuclear energy. Advanced nuclear energy technologies have the potential to provide safe, reliable, and clean baseload power. Nuclear fuel is energy dense and can be efficiently stockpiled. Five uranium pellets, 1 inch tall, can generate the same amount of electricity as one Olympic-sized swimming pool of natural gas. But adopting nuclear energy requires very serious consideration. It needs to be studied very carefully to ensure that it is safe for deployment in or around Singapore. We have been building up the technical expertise to evaluate the technology as it develops, and we are partnering overseas governments and companies who are leaders in this field. We really need the best expertise on this. We will continue to study these very carefully and rigorously, and there are dedicated teams in government that are doing this. Let me now turn to food security. Our primary concern is with inflationary pressures on our food products. Natural gas is a key feedstock for fertilizers. With disruptions to gas supply, fertilizer prices will go up. Food crops and animal feed will therefore cost more, and the prices of our imported food products will rise. As fuel costs go up, it will also cost more to transport and store food products. Singapore maintains strategic food stockpiles that will help us mitigate the impact of any unforeseen supply disruptions. Meanwhile, we are relooking at our supply chains with a view towards strengthening them. However, we are only able to maintain stockpiles of essential food types. Singaporeans should be prepared for supplies of some foods from some countries to be unavailable, and will have to exercise flexibility in choosing alternatives. There have been questions about the extent of Singapore's fuel reserves and food stockpiles. As a policy, we do not disclose these. That is deliberate. Disclosing such details would reveal where our limits lie, and that could be used against Singapore in times of crisis. What matters is that we have sufficient buffers and contingency plans in place, and we regularly review and strengthen these arrangements to ensure that they remain robust. So in conclusion, the HCMC will continue to closely monitor the situation. We will respond as a whole of government to take care of Singapore and Singaporeans. We will work together to get through the crisis and emerge stronger, as we always have. Thank you, sir. So the questions will be taken by the ministers who deal with their respective areas. Thank you.
SMS Jeffrey Siow.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a clarification for my speech. I earlier said that several members have asked if the government will consider reducing fuel or diesel subsidies. I misread. What I meant to say was that several members have asked if the government will consider reducing fuel or diesel duties. It's the exact opposite of what I actually said, so I thought I should clarify. Thank you.
There's an important clarification. Before I call honourable members for clarifications, I just wish to point out that pursuant to Standing Order 23, members may seek clarification on the ministerial statements, but no debate shall be allowed thereon. Members can seek your clarifications by way of asking questions. So I seek members' understanding to keep your clarifications clear and concise so that ministers can answer as many clarifications as possible. Likewise, I'll ask the ministers to also keep your answers clear and concise. To make our discussions clearer, more focused, and efficient, I propose to structure our clarifications as follows. Firstly, clarifications on energy and trade-related matters. This could include petrol, electricity, and their impact on trade and the economy. The second group of clarifications will include the impact on local businesses and households and the support measures for them. And the third group of clarifications will be on general security issues and related matters. So I ask members' cooperation to group your clarifications according to the subject matters I had listed. This will give clarity to our discussions, make it easier to follow and understand the answers provided, and also allow for deeper and more focused examination of the issues and suggestions from members. I assure members that I will give you sufficient opportunity to make your clarifications on the different topics. So there's no need to make all your clarifications at once. Once again, the first basket of clarifications will be on energy and trade-related matters. I will then move on to the second group of clarifications on impact on local businesses and households and the support measures for them. And finally, the third group of clarifications will be on security issues and related matters. I thank members for your cooperation. So, first group of clarifications, Mr. Saktiandi Supat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have three clarifications related to your first first set of questions, Mr. Speaker. First, SQ is, Singapore is a price taker and very concerned about inflation pass-through. But with the Middle East situation, there are unknowns. So I would like to ask the committee and government for their view about the risks of export restrictions of energy supply by our partners, especially in the region. Second is, can the government share its view on food resilience, especially with some concerns about seafood and fish supply, with the risk that diesel shortages for fishermen in the region may affect supply. So the concern is whether seafood is regarded also as an essential in the government's definition. Third, I noticed that our measures, as SMS shared earlier, our measures are calibrated. In some ways, for now, it looks very sound. It's also a testament to our long-term focus in terms of policy and our macro policy mix. My question is, our macro policy mix to address this supply shock is very clear, but what is the likelihood of the inflation pass-through continuing into 2027 and even into 2028? And if there's a need for off-budget measures when future tranches are needed. I think SMS mentioned there's always a possibility and ability to do that, but what's the possibility of off-budget measures coming? And lastly, our ability to maintain our strong Sing dollar policy to mitigate imported inflation. That has always been the case, but I think going forward, I'm aware that MES will be releasing its policy statement in April later on, but I think it's very important for us to continue to maintain our strong Sing dollar policy to control inflation pass-through. And I've started earlier, inflation pass-through is of utmost importance to me. Thank you.
Minister Tan See Leng.
Speaker, given the brevity of time, I would dispense with the thanking. I would take the first question on the energy and his point about the fact that we are price taker and how we are thinking of the possibility of the risks of export restrictions by some of our partners. I think perhaps to curate the point more, I think you're more particularly referring specifically to natural gas, because that is really how we are powering up our entire country and our economy. Now, as everyone knows, 95% of our electricity comes from natural gas itself. We import natural gas primarily through piped natural gas from our immediate neighbors, Malaysia, Singapore, as well as LNG from around the world. At this particular point in time, there is no upstream disruptions from the piped natural gas supply. For LNG, we continue to source the whole world through GasCo, which, if you recall, it was it was the previous government in this chamber that we passed an amendment to our Electricity Act, allowing us to form GasCo and then to centralize the procurement of gas. So I think this has come in quite presciently, so that today we are able to, through GasCo, source for supplies of LNG from all over the world. We have now diversified our LNG supplies beyond the Middle East. We source them from Australia, from the US, from Mozambique, and even as we speak, we continue to look for new markets. For us, diversification has always been one of the key strategies. Of course, we also now look for alternative sources, renewable energy or otherwise, but I think that would take a bit more time. Having said that, we have also ensured that our generation system, our GenCos, can run both on natural gas and on diesel. So in the event that we don't have enough natural gas, the GenCos will be required to switch to diesel to run and power. And we have conducted regular audits every quarter on these GenCos to ensure that the CCGTs can switch to diesel. And thus far, our audit statistics have shown that we are 99.9% ready in switching. So we have also established stockpiles, but as I've also shared before, given the constraint of land that we have within our country, there is a physical limit as to how much stockpiling we can do. Of course, we've also explored whether we could put it on the waters, get this very large VLCCs, or use the FSRUs. These are floating sort of storage and regasification units. But then again, space and the cost to maintain these VLCCs, these very large carriers, would not be, at this particular point in time, that economically feasible. But I want to assure the member and all members of the House that we constantly establish close relationships, dialogues, conversations with like-minded partners. I think the key in point, as DPM shared, our Prime Minister has also issued joint statement with the Prime Minister of Australia, Prime Minister Albanese, to establish ties and to ensure that we can continue to get supply of LNG from Australia. I hope that reassures the member. Thank you.
On the food resilience, SMS Zaki.
I thank the member for his question. And on seafood specifically, we don't see immediate risks. We have diversified our food imports. We've also got local production of seafood ready available. At this point, as both DPM and Coordinating Minister have shared, our main risk lies with for agriculture on fertilizer. And in the short term, no impact, but we think there could be secondary impact, as you shared, with diesel and other energy price, just with other sectors. So we're monitoring the situation and we'll keep everyone posted once things happen. Thank you.
Mr. Super, your question on the support measures, I'll defer to the next bucket for SMS Siow to respond. Mr. Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For this first part of questions, I have two PQs which are directed at ministers who are dealing with questions pertaining to energy security. In a Facebook post about a week ago, the minister in charge of energy, science and technology warned about the possibility of fuel shortages that could not be ruled out in the medium to long term, and that Singaporeans and businesses should prepare for significant turbulence in the months to come. And the minister also projected up to a 5-year repair time for Qatar's LNG facilities. My first parliamentary question, my first question, clarification, I beg your pardon, Notwithstanding the expiry of LNG contracts with Indonesia in 2028, is the government in touch with both Indonesia and Malaysia, which supply close to half of our piped LNG, to potentially increase supplies? And have there been any deliberations in this regard? The second question pertains to energy security more generally. Does the war in the Middle East present an opportunity to potentially bring forward Singapore's plans of acquiring more renewable energy sources such as hydroelectricity from our neighbours and in larger quantities than had been previously planned? Thank you.
Minister Tan.
I mentioned the fuel shortages potentially ahead because the trend of the escalation of the crisis in the Middle East is very real. I think if you follow the tweets, you follow all of the news that's coming out, whether it's from the US or from Iran, from Israel itself, I think you can pretty much come to that same conclusion. So I think it's important for us as a country that while we can take some calm, but we should also be very pragmatic and very real about what the challenges are. And the fact is that because we don't produce any of these natural resources on our shores, we therefore have to be prepared for a possible worst case scenario. Not worst case, but a worst case scenario compared to what it is today. And to that end itself, we constantly reach out to our immediate neighbors to talk about PNG, the continuous supply of PNG. Some of them are expiring in 2028, but at the same time, we also establish a more diversified source country strategy so that it strengthens our position in terms of our resilience. Some of the existing fields that we are drawing from inherently in itself are also faced with dwindling reserves within those reservoirs that we are tapping from. Of course, we are also discussing with our neighbors about the potential of exploring new areas for us to tap into. Those conversations happen contemporaneously with our discussions on renewable energy imports. And to that end, if the member recall, we have already awarded both conditional approval or conditional licensing of up to about 8.35 gigawatts of renewable energy. Our original target was 6. We have exceeded that. Today, given this uncertainty, we are indeed ramping up the negotiations, the discussions with our counterparts to see how we can expedite both the completion of the feasibility studies as well as the feasibility, the commercial feasibility of laying of the subsea cables. Those are happening in progress. So I hope to give some positive news, but we are stepping up. Today, I'm not at liberty to share that first. Now, where we are, I can't predict how long more this war will take. And what I think we should be sure about is that because we are open, we're connected, while this is an advantage for us, given the 150 oil majors that we have here, the third largest trading oil hub in the world, the sixth largest refinery complex in the world, but upstream, the crude still has to come from somewhere. And if Middle East as a source is choked, we will still not necessarily have that significant impact, but the impact downstream is that it will take longer time for crude from other parts of the world to bypass the Middle East to come to us. The quality of the crude, they are also different. And because of the differences in the quality of the crude, the run rates of our refinery complexes would also therefore have to be optimized. So it is this whole cascade, the whole cascade of the different refinery processes that we also have to take into account that's contributing, in some cases, amplifying this crisis. But our modus operandi has always been, we do not impose export restrictions, and we will still abide by the rules-based global trading framework. Thank you.
Mr. Edward Chia.
Thank you, Speaker. Given that the current energy crunch is disproportionately impacting Asia, does the Minister see this as an opportunity to strengthen regional cooperation in energy resilience, including exploring ASEAN collaboration in nuclear energy, such as joint investments and joint operations in the nuclear power plant?
Minister Tan.
We certainly see an opportunity in every crisis. And I think it's precisely what all of us do, our entire team, fellow POHs, GPC members, that we constantly outreach to our like-minded partners to work even more closely with them. I think the most recent visit 2 weeks ago to Japan with the Prime Minister, last week's visit to Australia, and there will be many more of such outreach to many of our like-minded partners. On the nuclear energy collaboration, it's not for want of or lack of trying. I think you appreciate the fact that because we are so small, and as Coordinating Minister for National Security alluded to just now, we have to ensure that these advanced nuclear energy technologies are safe. They indeed are today. The physics work, the engineering work, it's just that there hasn't been a single site of deployment yet. I mean, there are some that's in the process of being commissioned, for instance, in China, and there are some coming up in the US, but we haven't seen a single modular reactor site being put up and operating commercially. And I think the member will appreciate the fact that regardless of how we collaborate with the rest of the ASEAN member states, we will never put our population at risk of adopting a first-of-a-kind technology. We can be a fast adopter, but we cannot be the first-of-a-kind mover. I hope that sort of gives you the context of what we're doing. Thank you.
Mr. Leong Eng Hua.
Sir, my questions relates to the sharp spike in the diesel prices. Diesel prices is now north of $4 per liter, even more expensive than petrol. Very unusual phenomenon. And so I want to, and it's severely impacting many of the transport, logistical business, construction business sectors as well. So can I ask the Minister if he can share why this phenomenon of diesel being more and more expensive than petrol? Minister earlier shared that the government's gencos can actually switch from gas to diesel. So is that the reason why diesel has gone up, because of the government procurement of diesel? So more importantly, what can the government do to help businesses that depends on diesel, which is a low-cost fuel, for their businesses to do their deliveries, including construction sectors? So I'm particularly happy that Acting Minister Jeffrey Siow had just said about this construction sector. For the critical public sector projects, we will be co-sharing the cost increases for diesel. So how can we enable or incentivize our other businesses to do that, to help companies that are impacted by the cost increases of diesel? Thank you.
Minister Tan.
Our diesel prices have risen mainly due to global factors. I mean, the ongoing tensions involving Iran, as I've said a few times already, significantly increase the uncertainty and, of course, the risk to oil supply, and it pushes up the crude oil all over the world. Now, if you compare diesel, actually diesel it's a very versatile fuel mix because there's strong demand from transport, from shipping, industry, and there's also some limited refining capacity that is possible using diesel. And as I've shared with you, even our CCGTs, which the Gencos use, can use diesel as a sort of a backup. So it's a very versatile use. Now, you appreciate the fact that it's also easier to store diesel compared to natural gas. Because natural gas, the boiling point of natural gas, I think it's probably about minus 150 over degrees Celsius. So to keep natural gas, you need that energy to keep it at that level. And if you put it in a FSRU, there's a lot of boil off of that gas, so you got to use it. So LNG is not an easy fuel for you to store, unlike diesel. So when you talk about stockpiling, of course, a significant proportion of that amount is in diesel. So you can appreciate that because of the versatility, and in farm tractors in many of the agrarian countries around, that emphasis has always been on diesel. And so that's why it has risen faster compared to petrol. As far as the rollout of support measures, SMS, Acting Minister for Transport, Jeff Siow, has already shared what are the measures. MTI will continue to keep a close watch on this space, and if need be, the government will not hesitate to come in to act to help.
Mr. Bartley Palsy.
Thank you, Speaker. I have several clarifications to make. Firstly, is the government engaging the Iranian authorities to secure transit through the Strait of Hormuz for Singapore-flagged vessels, similar to what other countries like Malaysia has done? And will Singapore be open to paying a toll to pass through the Strait of Hormuz? Secondly, is the government considering further regulating petrol station operators to ensure that changes in petrol prices, especially increases, are linked to actual market conditions, and if not, why not? And thirdly, what is the status of Singapore's helium supplies following the closure of the Straits of Hormuz, and whether the government has contingency plans to help the semiconductor industry access sufficient helium supplies for production? And also, does the government foresee any delays in MRI procedures or increases in the price of MRIs for the rest of the year as a result of shortages in helium? Thank you.
Minister Ong.
Let me address the issue on helium, on MRI machine. Helium is used in small quantities as a cooling agent in MRI machine. They don't get topped up very frequently, so our consumption of helium is actually small, and our supply of helium is largely not from the Middle East. So as of now, MRI operations will not be affected for now.
M.O.S. Gunn.
I'll take the question on helium on semiconductor. For semiconductor sector, helium is used mainly in wafer fabrication for heat management, cooling, and process stability. Now, by and large, the wafer fabs here have a multi-source strategy for helium supplies, and wafer fabs in Singapore in particular, they have so far not expressed immediate operational impact, but have started to activate more alternative supplies. And we will continue to work closely with the industry to monitor their needs. Thank
you. The question on security, the part about Straits of Hormuz and Iranian, Minister Pipian, you want to answer now or you want to do it at the last part? I suggest we do it at the last part, yeah. All right, Mr. Fauzi, I'll direct the question back to Minister Balakrishnan later. Mr. Hu Zhexiang.
Thank you, Speaker. I declare that I work in the logistics arm of the port. So I have two clarifications. First, Will the measures to support the domestic transport and critical sector extend to the logistics and supply chain sector, such as the hauliers as well as the port, because this is certainly a critical sector during this period? Second SQ. The war accelerates a fundamental global supply chain shift that has been happening for several years, away from cheapest, fastest, and the leanest to safest, most resilient, as well as the most trusted. So the ESR recommendations are timely and should be implemented swiftly. But my question is, are they bold enough and do they go far enough in view of what has just happened in the Middle East? Will Singapore be able to not just survive disruption, but thrive because of it as a reliability hub for our region? Thank you.
Speaker, I'd like to respond to Mr. Fauzi's earlier question on petrol prices at the petrol stations. Now, Singapore has a competitive and open economy, and prices naturally will fluctuate in response to various factors, including changes in global supply and global demand. The government does not dictate the prices or price changes of businesses so long as the prices are set independently. Instead, the government's approach is to ensure that the market remains competitive. Now, for the petrol stations, we also know that there are several players in the market. At present, there's no evidence to suggest that the market structure is not competitive. The entry of Synergy, operated by Union Gas, is also an encouraging sign as it provides more choices to consumers. The Competition and Consumer Commission of Singapore will continue to watch closely the pump prices to make sure there is no anti-competitive behavior by the businesses.
Acting Minister Jeffrey Siow.
Mr. Speaker, let me respond to Mr. Fu Zhexiang's two questions. The first is on the port and port services and whether they can be considered as critical services. As I mentioned in my speech, what the government agencies will do is to assess whether or not such services are critical parts of what we have to do, and whether the direct impacts of these services are due to the rise in prices. So in this case, MPA will assess that and make a case to MOF for support. On the economic strategies review, indeed, I agree with the member that there are opportunities for us to look at. The ESR is a plan for us to remake our economy for the next 5 to 10 years. It's a long-term strategy. But one of the key things that we are looking at through the ESR is how to strengthen Singapore as a hub of flows. And I think the energy crisis reiterates for us how important that strategy is, because it's precisely because that Singapore is in the middle of energy flows that we're able to have energy security and to be able to be in the position that we are in. Thank you.
Associate Professor Kenneth Goh.
Thank the ministers for their responses. Just wanted to clarify, in modeling some of these scenarios regarding our fuel sufficiency, I was wondering if these assessments include more materially longer or more severe kinds of scenarios than that we typically model. And on the and whether or not the price reflects supply and demand, whether there is a price threshold and a duration for which the price of the commodities are sustained for, that we are monitoring before we implement more rationing measures. So.
Minister Tan.
We simulate models across chronological parameters as well as geographical parameters. So our simulations run particularly for power generation. Our scenarios run on if one region is completely choked versus 2 regions versus multiple regions. And we built that simulation accordingly. I am not at liberty to share that part because it's a function of our own national security. For the other simulation, we have simulated based on a 3-month, 5-month, 1-year window. And the parameters, of course, goes into a lot of details in terms of which are the sectors that's most exposed, and then which are the cascading effect sectors that get indirectly influenced, and then the more domestic sectors getting influenced. So there are multiple simulation scenarios. One of the key things is that our civil servants are very, very well adept in managing all of these different scenarios. And like I said, I cannot go into the details because it's a matter of our own security. Thank you.
Ms. Polisan.
Thank you, Speaker. I have 3 SQs. SQ1, what is the government's assessment of the overall food supply situation, and how will the government stabilize the prices of essential food items and curb profiteering so that seniors and also low-income families can still afford their meals and food expenses? SQ2, the local bus transport companies are badly affected by the surge in diesel prices, and they are running diesel cost increase of more than $1 million per month for some of them. However, they are also bound by the prices locked in their contracts and are not able to increase their prices. These local transport companies are essential to ensure our workers can get to work on time. Other than transportation for school children and people with disabilities, how would the measures help such local transport companies tide through this crisis, especially if the war prolongs? SQ3, jet fuel supply has been severely affected and fuel prices have surged dramatically. The Sustainable Aviation Fuel Levy has been postponed to apply for flights from 1st January 2027 onwards. How will the impact on fuel supply and fuel prices impact Singapore as an air hub, especially if the war prolongs? Thank you.
Emma Gun.
Speaker, I'd like to respond to Dr. Kenneth Goh's question regarding price threshold. First, in the context of petrol, which I mentioned earlier on, regulating or capping petrol or diesel pump prices will distort the market and also actually will serve to benefit vehicle users and owners that consume more and possibly people who are more well-to-do. And this may not be a fair way of distributing our limited resources. It will also reduce the incentive for Singaporeans as well as businesses to switch to more energy-efficient modes of transport. Instead, what the government's approach is to ensure that our fuel market remains well-functioning and competitive so that fuel companies are incentivized to compete, innovate, and become more efficient. Now, on electricity prices, whether it's a price threshold, the electricity prices is something that the government will continue to watch closely because it affects households and businesses directly. Again, our priority is to make sure that there are enough support measures, such as Use Safe, CDC vouchers, and targeted support measures for businesses that are more affected by the electricity price increase.
SMS Zaki, you want to respond to Ms. Po's? Oh, sorry, SMS Morali first.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I would like to respond to the Honourable Member Ms. Po's third question on jet fuel. We are working with the aviation stakeholders to monitor the fuel supply for aviation hubs carefully to ensure that it remains stable. There are no significant supply shortages for now, as we have adequate fuel supply from the diversified sources. But if higher fuel prices persist, this will lead to increased cost pressures, which may filter to passengers and consumers in various sectors. We note that some airlines have made commercial decisions to raise ticket prices in response to the soaring cost of fuel. These remain commercial decisions which we do not intervene in. However, we will continue to work closely with the industry to monitor the situation and assess whether there's a need for government to take further measures.
SMS Zaki.
Speaker, Singapore Food Story 2 mitigates the impact of food supply disruptions on Singapore through its 4 pillars working together, which is diversification, global partnerships, stockpiling, and local production. Due to our efforts in partnership with other governments, for example, Thailand and Vietnam for rice cooperation, New Zealand and Australia for other food areas, As well as working with industry to diversify our food sources over the years, importers can now pivot more readily to alternative sources if needed. If the situation worsens and food imports are severely disrupted, the stockpile of essential food items, as shared by Coordinating Minister, that we have been maintaining and expanding will provide us time to restore food flows and sustain our population. Finally, local farms can increase their production and provide us with a regenerative source of fresh food that is maintained during prolonged disruption. This multi-pillar approach ensures that Singapore is able to meet our food needs and Singaporeans can continue to experience reasonable normalcy during disruptions. However, we also have to recognize that in a crisis, we will have to prioritize our efforts. It will not always be possible to have everyone's favorite food or favorite brand in every disruption, but what we can do is to provide the assurance of food supply where it matters most. The government is monitoring the developments in the Middle East and its impact on Singapore's food supply closely. Singapore imports most of our food and from many different sources. We have 180 countries and regions that we import from. The Middle East accounts for less than 1% of our total food imports, and food coming from major ports such as the Straits of Hormuz accounts for even less, at less than 0.5%. In the near term, there is no imminent risk of food supply disruption to Singapore. However, as global food supply chains are interconnected, we cannot rule out eventual disruptions to our food supply if the conflict persists. In this ministerial statement, DPM mentioned that the closure of the Straits of Hormuz would have an impact on other key products, including fertilizers. This in turn could translate to lower agricultural yield down the line and potential supply disruptions. So we are monitoring this and food supply situation very closely. We will keep up our diversification, global partnerships, local production and stockpiling efforts as required. And since the start of the Middle East conflict, the Singapore Food Agency has also stepped up our engagements with importers and retailers to share information on possible risks to food supply so that they may activate alternative sources early and when needed. So we stand ready to activate our existing arrangements with partner countries to ensure that food continues to flow as needed too. So we want to support our local farmers, especially now to weather this crisis. We will help them to increase their market share for certain food types, which will strengthen Singapore's food resilience in the long term. And as I say, never waste a good crisis.
Acting Minister Jeff, SMS Zaki, have you finished?
Mr. Speaker, allow me to speak in Malay. Bagi makanan kita tak menjangka risiko gangguan bekalan makanan dalam jangka masa yang terdekat kepada Singapura. Bagaimanapun terdapat kesan hari ini terhadap baja, oleh kerana baja adalah hasil sampingan minyak dan bekalan yang terjejas akibat penutupan Strait Hormuz. Maka itu, kos baja telah meningkat dan akan memberi kesan kepada harga makanan. Buat masa ini, pemerintah akan membantu rakyat menerusi langkah-langkah sokongan seperti CDC voucher dan juga cost of living special payment. Namun kita perlu bersiap sedia untuk apa yang berlaku selepas ini. Ia mungkin bermula sebagai sebuah krisis tenaga, namun ia boleh berkembang untuk menjadi gangguan bekalan yang lebih besar dalam banyak sektor termasuk sektor pemakanan. Kerjasama kita dengan pemerintah lain dan juga industri telah memberi kita peluang untuk memperbagaikan lagi sumber makanan kita. Dan ini bermakna bahawa para pengimport makanan boleh beralih kepada sumber-sumber lain dengan mudah. Jika keadaan bertambah buruk, kita ada bekalan makanan iaitu stockpile untuk menampung penduduk kita. Ladang tempatan juga boleh meningkatkan lagi penghasilan mereka dan menyediakan bekalan makanan segar kepada kita. Jadi kita masih mempunyai bekalan makanan untuk memenuhi keperluan kita. Sedang pemerintah meningkatkan lagi usaha kepelbagaian, kerjasama global, penghasilan tempatan dan juga usaha-usaha menyimpan stok. Seperti mana yang diperlukan, kita bersedia untuk cuba memperbagaikan sumber dan membuat penyesuaian kepada tabiat dan gaya hidup kita. Terima kasih.
Acting Minister Jeffrey Siow.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to just quickly respond to Ms. Polisan's question on local bus services. We have received feedback from transport associations on the impact on local bus services, and we're working very closely with them to smoothen out the impact on these bus services. As I mentioned already, where the bus services are critical, we will co-share the cost of these services, but for others that are more general, we will work with them to smoothen out the impact. We will expect some pass-through of the costs to the consumers, just like my colleague SMS Murali mentioned, through airfares. And broadly, we will support, of course, the bus companies through the business measures, for instance, like the corporate income tax rebates that I had talked about in my speech. And also on the consumer side, we are also supporting, obviously, through the payments like cost of living, special allowances, which can be used to defray some of these costs. Thank you.
There are still many members who have raised their hands. Can I again request members for this first bucket, keep it to the energy, trade and industry matters. We will move on to support measures after this. Mr. Gerald Giam.
So the International Energy Agency requires its members to ensure oil stock levels equivalent to no less than 90 days of net imports. While we are not an IEA member state, this is a widely recognized global benchmark for emergency energy resilience. Could the Minister confirm if Singapore's oil stock levels meet this international standard to provide greater assurance for Singaporeans and businesses? And I'll note that I'm not asking for us to reveal all our cards, but just our adherence to this international standard.
Minister Tan.
I'm very glad that the member recognizes an issue of our national security. I think suffice to say, I've put it on record that we have supplies to last for months, and we will keep it as that. But I also would like to use this, Mr. Speaker, sir, if I may, in Mandarin. Our energy, 能源取之不易，我们一定要好好珍惜。Thank you.
Mr. Hong Wing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given the war in the Middle East, there's also the possibility of simultaneous disruptions both at the Straits of Hormuz and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait of the Red Sea. So, could the government elaborate whether such a double chokehold situation are explicitly considered and what are the consequences? How do these scenarios translate into preemptive measures that safeguard both supply continuity and household affordability? Thank you.
Minister Tan.
On the Straits of Hormuz, it impacts about 9% to 10% of our liquefied natural gas supplies from Qatar. We think that a simultaneous choke or blockage of the Red Sea near the Gulf of Eden, where the Houthis from South Yemen, is also something that I did highlight in my Facebook posts about a week ago, would not have a significant impact because it primarily impacts supplies coming from Europe through the Suez Canal. Many of them are pharmaceuticals. They actually come in through air.
Mr. Bikram Nair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, I note that amongst the different sources of energy, diesel prices have risen much higher than electricity prices. And diesel, of course, fuels many commercial operators, including buses and lorries, which feeds into many other sectors. So does the minister think that this is a good time for operators of commercial businesses to switch from diesel trucks and lorries to friendlier EV versions? And if so, would any incentives be given for such switches to make it easier to change capital, which is of course a long-term investment? Thank you.
Minister Tan.
A function of why the electricity tariffs seem to have risen slower compared to diesel is, as I've shared, in fact, DPM shared earlier on, how the regulated tariff is calculated based on the last quarter's prices of natural gas, which is benchmarked to the Brent crude index. From January to February, the war broke out on February the 28th. So we've only factored in at most about half a month of that price increase. And that's why that has not actually come in to impact the regulated tariff for electricity. And I've also gave everyone a warning that the next quarter's tariff will see significantly sharper increases. Well, I thank you for that PQ, for that SQ, because I'm going to leverage on this SQ to let everyone know, and I've sort of put up a harbinger of what is not insider trading, because I think it's an open secret that the prices have gone up significantly. For household consumers, for domestic consumers, if they want to hedge, they may want to switch to a fixed price contract moving forward. I think suffice for me to say. Now, for businesses, how they're going to convert the diesel trucks, the diesel vehicles to EVs, I think for them to perhaps move out of their trucks today to convert it physically, I think it would take a lot of time. I'm not an engineer, so I wouldn't know what is involved in that. Of course, if they want to trade it off and buy an EV instead, I think that is an option that's available. As far as any subsidies and so on are concerned, I think this is not something that I can comment on. Suffice to say that for some of the businesses, if they want to convert to more energy efficient measures and so on, there's the EEG grant. For the larger ones, there's also the REG emissions grant as well. And I would think that these businesses can actually find out more about which are the ones that they are eligible for and make the applications accordingly.
Mr. Lex Yam. Mr. Yam, hang on first. I think Acting Minister Siow would like to respond as well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to take the opportunity to do a plug for the Singapore's electric vehicle scheme for heavy vehicles. We have a grant of 40K, which we announced, I think, in March this last year. And there are companies that have already made use of the grant. It also covers the provision of funding for chargers, which actually is the chief constraint behind why the adoption of heavy vehicles, electric heavy vehicles, is not as prevalent as, say, passenger vehicles. But we have this grant, and we will encourage companies to make use of it to switch to more energy-efficient vehicles. Thank you.
Mr. Yam.
Thank you, Speaker. Building on the point that the Minister in charge of Energy had raised earlier about fixed rates, there is concern amongst consumers, of course, that the GenCos and the electricity suppliers may at some point invoke force majeure, and that would affect the supply contracts that are signed with consumers. Therefore, I seek clarification what safeguards there are in place to protect consumers and businesses from disruptions and dramatic price spikes, and how will the government ensure continuity of supply and fair contractual outcomes for consumers as well as the GenCos?
Minister Tan.
Indeed, I think that is a valid concern. EMA has been constantly engaging all the GenCos. Now, today, supply at this point in time is not an issue, because We have got GESCO, which is source for supplies and diversified the various sources of supplies quite broadly. If anything at all, I think the force majeure portion comes because the pricing of these cargoes, these LNG cargoes coming in, has gone up significantly compared to pre-crisis time. So many of the contracts that they were locked in, they can no longer supply because obviously the feedstock has gone up significantly. And this is where EMA has stepped in to form the bridge between these large consumers together with the GENCOs. Our sense today is that the domestic consumers, because they actually form not a very big part of the GENCO's exposure. I think, if I'm not mistaken, and I have to check this, but I think they are at less than 4 megawatt, for the entire year itself. So I don't think they will be affected that much. But nevertheless, I think my warning, my exhortation still stays, and that is the next few quarters will see significantly increase in tariffs itself, and it's something that all of us collectively will really have to take note of. We should not expect that the 2.1% increase in tariff for this quarter, I am able to hold it. So I think it's just something that is food for thought for everyone. Thank you.
Associate Professor James Lim.
So my clarification actually segues very nicely from the prior one by Mr. Alex Yam. Not long after the electricity market liberalization in the early 2000s, the government actually favored vesting contracts as a regulatory safeguard for price spikes over price caps or capacity market. Now, I believe such contracts were eventually expected to be phased out once sufficient competition was assured. And I understand that this tool is meant to regulate competitive pricing and not crisis-related shocks. Nevertheless, given the current developments, I wonder if the Minister would be willing to share if the mechanism is still in play today, whether it covers the full extent of electricity demand in Singapore, if this mechanism is indeed active for the current Hormuz crisis, and if so, what's the current gap between the vesting and wholesale market price? And finally, how much he believes the safeguard has passed through to the open retail market, given that price increases observed in February were about 10%.
Minister Tan.
As I've shared earlier on, for those GENCOs which have entered into very long vesting contracts, I think some of their clients and customers would already find it hard to keep and maintain those kind of pricing, and hence these are the ones that we are currently managing to try and understand the impact. I don't have the full details, and it is actually this group potentially that may invoke the FM clause, which is the force majeure clause itself. Having said that, today, a lot of the cargoes that we are buying in are on spot price, and that accounts for why that huge spike, because obviously the Straits of Hormuz, Qatar has invoked force majeure. I think on 1 or 2 of the cargoes, Shell has also invoked force majeure. So for us at GESCO, we have to make sure that we can get the replacement cargo. And we've succeeded, we've been successful in getting the replacement cargo. It's just that we are not able to get it at earlier pricing. To your question as to how this would impact, we don't have all the necessary details at this point in time. Perhaps at the next parliamentary sitting, I would invite you to file a PQ. We can get into a more robust presentation at that point in time. Thank you.
Mr. Sean Low.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question pertains to early signals.
One, does the government detect any early signals of job losses arising from the new disruption? Two, does the government detect any early signals in terms of wealth inflows into Singapore, given our status as a wealth hub? And three, does the government detect any early signals with regards to Singapore's status as an aviation hub? And if the answer is yes, what's the government's position and what is the government's response? Thank you.
Minister Tan.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I can just talk about jobs. In case you're wondering, I'm still the manpower minister. Notwithstanding the entire discussion was just on energy. What we have done is to work very closely with MTI, EDB, for the affected power generation, refinery, the energy intensive emission sector, to ensure that there's no permanent scarring. We will continue to help workers in those particular sectors itself. Now, we have not completely ironed out the plans. Again, if the member is interested, he can file a PQ, and we can actually elaborate on that more. For the rest of the signals, perhaps I can invite my other colleagues to take on that question. Thank you.
SMS Murali.
Sir, I'd like to answer the Honourable Member Mr. Lowe's question on the status of the aviation hub. There have been some flight disruptions. Most of Changi Airport's flights, apart from the disruptions, most of Changi Airport's flights have been operating normally. The disruptions have been limited to some Singapore Middle East passenger and cargo services. Airlines have also added flights between Singapore and other regions, such as Europe, to cater to demand in the wake of the reduction in flights to the Middle East. The situation now still remains fluid and uncertain. It's too early to determine if longer-term network reconfigurations will take place. We will continue to work closely with the industry to monitor the situation. And thank you.
DPM Gan.
So let me just give a quick answer on the wealth hub. I think Singapore has been a financial center, and we have been a center to receive capital and wealth investment from all over the world. And there has been increased interest and inquiries with regard to wealth coming into Singapore. And we are happy to see that trend. And we are also happy that we are able to provide services to these investors and this capital, that we allow them to have alternative location to be able to continue to keep safekeep their wealth, and to also use Singapore as a center to allow them to, as a gateway to invest into this region. So I think we'll continue to monitor the situation, and we continue to ensure that we operate efficiently and reliably as a financial center.
We are still on the first bucket. I seem to be getting, quite a lot of the questions that are being asked are rather similar. And I can see the answers are also getting rather similar. So can I request, unless you have something really specific which have not been addressed before, please raise your hand. Otherwise, please don't raise your hand. Mr. Chris D'Souza.
Much obliged, sir. My excuse draw from the fact that the situation displays how, one, Singapore has agency, and two, how Singapore can use this situation as a catalyst. On agency, how can Singapore use its sterling status as an oil trading hub and a critical oil refinery center to create agency to trade with Australia, for example, for enhanced LNG, or New Zealand for food supplies? Here I declare that I am a lawyer in private practice who represents oil companies and oil refineries in Singapore. On the second point, as for us being able to use the situation as a catalyst, how can the crisis offer itself as a catalyst for Singapore to seriously explore nuclear civil energy, provided it is safe? Thank you.
Minister Tan.
I've answered in quite different parts, but perhaps to just curate it for the members' utility. First, indeed, this crisis is also an opportunity for us to build even closer ties with our reputation, our credibility, our consistency, our predictability, and our transparency. So our relationship with Australia will hopefully be up a few notches when we reassure them that we will abide by a rules-based multilateral trading system. We will not impose export restrictions, and depending on the upstream feedstock that we are able to get, and we continue to refine, our refineries continue to refine, notwithstanding the fact that there are different types of crude nowadays, but we still try to optimize the refinery complex operational capabilities to make sure that the downstream supply of EFPs, the essential fuel products, the diesel, the motor gas, together with naphtha, they continue to get the supply. And likewise, they are a major supplier, they're the third largest supplier of liquefied natural gas, that they would also not in any way curtail their exports to us. I think that's a start. At the same time, we will expand that to food resilience, food supply. Our Prime Minister has raised the ambition. We have substantively concluded the negotiations, I think, on AOTUS, which is the, I don't have the entire acronym, but I think it's, you know, the ES is essential supplies, yeah, but I don't know what's A and agreement, yeah, on, yeah, I think Minister Vivian may know that better. And at the same time, we are trying to see how we can accelerate the same discussions with Australia and other countries. On nuclear, I've also shared that it is not a question of us not wanting to do it. We want to make sure that it's safe. The small modular reactors, the advanced nuclear energies have proven to be very safe. We just want to ensure that there is a site that has been planted, is operational, and that we can use that as a reference site or model. Thank you.
Ms. Nadia Samdin.
Thank you, Speaker. On food price monitoring, given that we import more than 90% of our food supply, could the government share more whether there are ways for data on the monitoring dashboard that is used by the Ministry of Sustainability and the Environment to be shared more proactively so that households and businesses have more timely visibility of emerging price trends for scenario planning, and whether more forward-looking indicators can be included to help Singaporeans better cope with potential price fluctuations. As a second point, and I thank Minister Tan for some of his sharing in response to questions earlier on contingency scenario planning as well as stockpile for LNG and diesel. I understand the need to not disclose sensitive details around our national food stockpile. However, could the government consider whether there is merit to provide some general indicators of adequacy for certain food items and essentials, such as broad coverage ranges or scenario readiness, so as to give Singaporeans greater assurance in light of the current uncertainties, similar to the 2 to 3 months data which was shared during COVID-19. Where I'm coming from is, while many appreciate these broader updates, there's room to build understanding and make the impact clearer at an individual and household level, so that our people have a better understanding how prepared we are but not immune, and also a sense of agency that they can still do something amidst this uncertainty. Thank you.
Ms. Gunn.
Mr. Speaker, I'll answer the part about monitoring food prices. Department of Statistics actually publishes monthly indices on import prices of food products, and this allows us to assess imported food cost pressures that may in turn feed through some of our domestic food inflation and food and beverage services inflation. the indices cover non-cooked food price index as well as food and beverage services price index. On whether we can have forward-looking indices, I think we will have to continue to monitor the situation and as best as we can provide timely information to businesses as well as to local households. Thank you.
SMS Zaki, you want to respond?
Mr. Speaker, I think West Gun has covered food prices. Thank you.
Mr. Lee Hong Chun.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I would like to file my SQ in Mandarin. 鉴于新加坡高度依赖这个进口能源，部长是否能说明新加坡会考虑建立更多或扩大我们的燃油储备，以及在供应长期中断的情况下，我们现有的储备是否充足
Minister Tan.
Let me just summarize and translate in a broad gist. The member is asking whether we can increase our stockpile, whether we have plans to increase the reserves. As Coordinating Minister for National Security stated, the HCMC, together with the HCEG, we are currently not resting on our laurels. We are studying how to increase the current stockpile provisions. I want to reassure everyone that if I had the benefit of space, I would stockpile significantly higher amounts. Our very real constraint is the space we have here. Now, if we stockpile in a foreign country, then I don't think that that's really stockpiling for our own needs if the situation gets very, very severe. So I hope that we can understand that these are real constraints that we have here in our country. And hence, my original exhortation is energy is existential for us, energy is precious. Let's try to conserve them. For the scenario planning, as I've shared with Professor Koh earlier on, we have different contingency, different scenario planning for single country choke points to multi-country choke points. I'm not at liberty to share that because this is our national security. And I beg for your understanding and your indulgence. Thank you.
Mr. Dennis Tan.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to ask the Ministry of Transport appointment holder to answer my question 60. Essentially, my question 60 relates to what's the impact on Singapore's, of the media's conflict on Singapore's air and sea freight and our transport hubs. We've been a key maritime and air hub, and I'm grateful that Minister of State really has answered, has given some answers on the air hub. I wish to declare my interest as a consultant in a shipping law firm, and I have one supplementary question relating to the air hub, and this refers to the deferral of the SAF levy. While the pragmatic pause responds to current geopolitical volatility, how is the ministry working with SAFCO to secure long-term fixed price SAF supply contracts that might insulate our aviation hubs' decarbonization timeline from fossil fuel price spikes and regional instabilities? Thank you.
SMS Murali.
Mr. Speaker, sir, in response to the honourable members, Mr. Dennis Tan's question on maritime hub, I just want to say that for the current, port operations have been stable. There's no significant fuel supply shortages, and we have adequate fuel and bunker supply. We expect, however, tanker arrivals may decline in the coming months, given the disruption to global energy flows. In relation to SAF, at this point in time, it's a bit too early to disclose what our strategies would be. We have made announcement that SAF would kick in come 1st January 2027 for contracts entered from 2026, October 2026 onwards at this point in time. And as soon as we are able to make further announcements, we will do so. Thank you.
Mr. Sharul Taha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank Minister Tan for sharing the dual fuel nature of our power plants. How quick is this? My SQ is, how quick is this switching? Can it manage the volatility, especially this unprecedented volatility? And do we need to re-optimize our power plants to manage our energy generation resilience? First SQ. My second SQ is on our refining capability and feedstock flexibility. How adaptable are our refineries to alternative crude grades? And in a prolonged disruption scenario, do we foresee any erosion of Singapore's competitiveness relative to other refining hubs? And similar to what Member Mr. Chris D'Souza mentioned, is this an opportunity to strengthen our refining competitiveness beyond the relationships with other countries, but also in our capability to take other feedstock to diversify the source? Thank you.
Minister Tan.
Our GenCos comprises a combination of different CCGTs. Some are existing CCGTs that would require time for that conversion. Others, for instance, are using the new J-class, H-class type of CCGT, which can also be 30%, at least 30% hydrogen ready. So because of that spectrum of the number of GenCos and the CCGTs that we have here, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So if you recall, remember you were part of the same group of parliamentaries who passed the bill. What we have done is effectively strengthen our entire framework since 5 years ago, where EMA would require the different GenCos to show and to indicate to us ahead of time their gas, their supplies, their access to gas supplies, their vesting contracts, and so on. We, holding the stockpile, would then work with them to work out the time that would be required for that switch from gas to diesel, so as to ensure that there is no outage or sort of unnecessary downtime when they switch over. So that part of it is something that we work very closely with them. On your second point, what was the second point? On the refineries, yes. Today, it used to be that this is something that I've also learned over the last fortnight. I think those of you who are in oil and gas, you may know it better than I do. But there are primarily now, we have access to two types of crude, the sweet crude and the sour crude. Sour crude means that it's a lot more sulfur. And it comes mainly from the Middle East, the ones with a higher sulfur. And it is more favored because the downstream products you get, whether it's diesel, naphtha, to bitumen, seems to be, more versatile compared to the other types of crude. So what we've done is that there will be some compromise in the refinery capabilities. There's some percentage loss when you have one predominant fuel to now two or three, at least two different fuel types, because you then need the space, the caverns, for you to rebalance between sour and sweet crude. So there is some compromise, but not to the extent that it would impact our competitiveness as a refinery complex and as a refinery hub, at least within the region itself. For your third point, which is on yes, I mean, at least with our team, myself, we've been working to see how we can strengthen this. I think it also calls for a fundamental pivot in terms of the thinking, because we do also at the same time want to decarbonize and work towards a zero emission target by 2050. And so long as you have the energy intensive sector, we need to think about how, while we build up, at the same time we need to have a clear pathway towards decarbonization. So having said that, actually our refineries are probably one of the most efficient in terms of carbon emissions. But as you step up the refinery, you have to keep up with that level of carbon emissions. It is a balance and a trade-off that we will have to consider over the medium to longer term.
I'm going to move on to the next group of clarifications. This should cover the impact on local businesses and households, and also the support measures for them. Ms. Ng Chee Meng.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the government for responding to NTUC's and our platform work association's calls to support sectors most affected by the recent fuel price increases. The measures announced for platform drivers and riders will go some way in easing the pressures on their livelihoods. I have two clarifications. May I clarify if similar support is being considered for other self-employed groups who are significantly impacted likewise, such as combi bus drivers and limousine drivers? I believe they are currently not covered in the announcement. NTUC will stand ready to partner the government as a stakeholder to ensure that these workers are not left behind. Second, may I ask if the government will encourage service buyers to take a fair and practical approach in reviewing existing contracts where sustained fuel cost increases materially affect the viability of our workers' livelihoods? Thank you.
Acting Minister Siow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On self-employed groups, specifically the combi and bus drivers, in 2002, I think government worked very closely with the NTUC to work out support measures for this particular group. I think we'll be happy to work with NTUC again to see how that can be done. As for service buyers and whether or not we can help them with contracts, the government has already stated out its position as a responsible buyer for its own contracts. We hope that we can also encourage private sector buyers, service buyers, as well as service providers to also come to reasonable accommodations for these purposes. Thank you.
Ms. Ng Chee Shen.
Thank you, Speaker. I thank Acting Minister Jeffrey on sharing the support given to local businesses, especially on the extension of the energy efficiency grant, which I've been asking for in my PQ. Now, I have two more clarifications on this point, on who is excluded, who may be excluded, and what may be excluded. On my first point, for SMEs, some of these energy efficiency machines or equipment may be considered large ticketed items for them. So has the government considered schemes that can help to co-pay upon purchase orders, or even to pay direct to vendors upon installation of such equipment? My second point is, as Acting Minister Jeffrey Siow mentioned, that it's for base tier equipment. These are largely pre-approved equipment and machines. My point is, for some SMEs buying, they may have different sources from the pre-approved vendors and equipment. Can the submissions of new models or new equipment be concurrently considered with the application of the energy efficiency grant, especially in this time when we want to scale up adoption of energy efficiency equipment? Thank you.
SMS Jeffrey Siow.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for his question. In terms of large ticket items and whether government can co-pay through better financing, that's something we can consider. But I think overall the approach we have for the EEG is that we want to first extend the coverage. Second, we want to get the support out as soon as possible. So without having to change the scheme parameters significantly, I think what we want to do is just extend the current parameters. But we'll certainly consider at the later stage whether there are other things that we can do to enhance this in terms of financing. Similarly, for pre-approved, the reason why it's pre-approved is because we want to make sure that we get the support to the companies as soon as possible, which is why we have worked very closely with trade associations and business associations to understand which are the types of equipment that businesses use most frequently and are most energy saving. And we're happy to take in inputs together with the applications. I think today's application process is fairly automatic, but I will check with the economic agency to see whether there's room for us to give room for people to give suggestions on what type of equipment. Thank you.
Ms. Haslina Abdul Halim.
Thank you, Speaker. I have two clarifications in English and one in Malay. In light of wanting more Singaporeans to also be a part of the movement to manage energy consumption and usage, what are some national initiatives that can be brought back? For example, guidelines on lighting usage in public places or even in commercial buildings in terms of managing energy uses. Second is, what is some of the government's plan to partner with community organizations to help perhaps some residents or Singaporeans who fall through the crack and need a little bit more assistance due to the impact of the crisis in the Middle East? Mr. Speaker, in Malay. Awal tadi saya bertanya tentang sokongan yang boleh diberikan khusus mungkin kepada masyarakat yang lebih terkesan dengan kesudahan ataupun impak ekoran konflik di Timur Tengah, dan kita telah pun mendapatkan penerangan mengenai sokongan dari segi emosi, rohani dan juga mental. Kini bagaimana pula dengan dari segi ekonomi? Adakah wadah khusus ataupun sokongan lebihan yang boleh diharapkan mungkin daripada badan-badan membantu dan juga daripada mungkin MUIS maupun masjid? Terima kasih. Thank you.
Acting Minister. Pasha Ibrahim, please.
So I thank the member for the SQ. I will reply in Malay. Tuan Speaker, seperti yang dikongsi tadi, pemerintah menangani konflik di Timur Tengah ini dengan secara bersepadu. Kami sedar bahawa konflik ini menimbulkan kebimbangan yang mendalam dalam kalangan masyarakat kita. Ramai yang mungkin rasa cemas, bukan saja terhadap penderitaan manusia, tetapi juga terhadap kesan kepada keluarga dan kehidupan seharian mereka, termasuk kos yang meningkat. Sebagai sebuah ekonomi yang kecil dan terbuka, Singapura tidak terlepas daripada kesan krisis ini. Penutupan Selat Hormuz telah mengakibatkan kekurangan bekalan tenaga global termasuk minyak mentah dan gas, dan akan membawa impak kepada produk-produk utama lain seperti bahan mentah. Sebagai respons, Singapura mengambil langkah untuk mengukuhkan ketahanan kita. Kami telah mempelbagaikan sumber tenaga menjangkaui rantau Timur Tengah dan mengekalkan simpanan makanan strategik untuk mengurangkan gangguan bekalan. Kesan daripada kenaikan ini sudah dirasai dalam kehidupan seharian. Konflik ini juga akan dirasai oleh rakyat Singapura dengan harga tenaga dan makanan yang lebih tinggi, membawa kepada peningkatan kos sara hidup. Kita mesti bersedia bahawa tekanan ini mungkin berterusan pada bulan-bulan mendatang. Kami akan memantau dengan teliti harga makanan dan barangan serta perkhidmatan penting yang lain. Pemangku Menteri Jeffrey Siow telah memberi butiran tentang sokongan yang akan diberikan. Kami akan melancarkan bantuan segera kepada para peniaga melalui ribat cukai pendapatan korporat yang dipertingkat dan meluaskan geran kecekapan tenaga kepada semua sektor. Bagi individu, kami akan mengeluarkan voucher CDC lebih awal dan menambah bayaran khas kos sara hidup belanjawan 2026 sebanyak $200 bagi rakyat Singapura yang layak untuk meringankan kos pembelajaran harian. Pemerintah bersedia untuk memberi sokongan tambahan jika diperlukan. Bagi masyarakat Islam kita, MUIS sedang berhubung dengan para pelajar Singapura di Timur Tengah dan memberikan sokongan yang diperlukan. MUIS juga bekerjasama dengan rakan kongsi seperti Persatuan Agensi Pelancongan Islam Singapura iaitu AMTAS mengenai urusan umrah dan haji. Kami akan terus memantau keadaan dengan teliti dan mengambil langkah-langkah yang diperlukan. Yang penting, keselamatan dan kesejahteraan rakyat Singapura adalah keutamaan kita. Seperti yang dikatakan oleh DPM Gan tadi, kita semua juga boleh memainkan peranan. Kita harus melakukan apa yang kita boleh untuk menjimatkan tenaga, mengelakkan pembaziran dan lebih berhati-hati dalam cara kita menggunakan sumber. Langkah-langkah ini oleh setiap isi rumah boleh membuat perubahan, terutamanya dalam masa yang tidak menentu ini. Tuan, seperti krisis-krisis yang lalu, saya menggalakkan masyarakat kita untuk bersatu hati dan menyokong satu sama lain menggunakan semangat saling menyokong yang kuat dan berdiri bersama. Mari kita kukuhkan perpaduan kita dan kekal tabah menempuhi masa-masa mencabar ini. Kita mesti memastikan bahawa ketegangan global tidak mewujudkan perpecah belahan dalam masyarakat kita. Ini adalah peluang untuk kita mendekati antara satu sama lain dan mencontohi nilai-nilai bersama yang membimbing kita sebagai satu masyarakat untuk menjadi versi terbaik diri kita dan kebaikan bersama semua rakyat di Singapura. Terima kasih, Tuan.
Mr. Pritam Singh.
Thank you, Speaker. Moving to the second bucket of questions. So in Budget 2021, support was extended to Singaporeans who rely on vehicles for their livelihoods. This extended to taxis, taxi drivers, private hire car drivers, and motorcyclists. The support rendered included road tax rebates and petrol duty rebates. Given the elevated prices of fuel, specifically diesel now by up to 70%, what thresholds will determine the extension of similar measures today to assist Singaporeans who rely on vehicles for their livelihoods? The second question covers a subject that was discussed in the earlier bucket of questions, and this pertains to electricity prices for the upcoming quarters. Given that it is really certain that these prices would be elevated and perhaps significantly elevated, does the government intend to extend further support to households and businesses in anticipation of these higher electricity prices? And finally, I'd like to make a point with regard to bus drivers and some small operators of transport businesses who are significantly affected by the diesel price hike and who are not included in this tranche of the government support measures. When can these individuals expect support? Because for some of them, the situation is incredibly dire.
Acting Minister Siow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We very much understand the concerns of drivers and SMEs who are reliant on diesel fuel and may not have ready alternatives. The suggestion on whether or not to give a road tax rebate or reduction, it's too blunt a measure. We have, as I said in my speech earlier, aside from being a revenue measure, actually road tax works in tandem with our other vehicle policies to achieve other longer-term outcomes. For instance, pricing in externalities related to public health and pollution, influencing vehicle buyers to choose more fuel-efficient vehicles. And these objectives remain relevant, and we don't want to go in the opposite direction. Conversely, so therefore a reduction of road tax is too blunt a tool, and so what we want to do is in fact be more focused and targeted in who we support, and our approach therefore is to provide directed support to SMEs, companies, drivers, people who are more directly affected by the fuel prices, and the overall package I think provides that support, whether it is through the corporate income tax rebate, as I mentioned earlier, as well as other targeted support like the $200 that we are giving to the taxi drivers, the platform workers, which includes the private hire car drivers. We will continue to assess the situation closely, and if there's a need for us to provide further support, we can consider that at a later juncture. On the USAVE rebates, we had initially sized them, as I mentioned, at 1.5 times the regular rate of what we normally give. It is to indeed cover the immediate tranche of both April to June and also subsequently from July to September. And the tranches will be dispersed in April and July respectively. At the moment, we do not know exactly how much the fuel tariff is going to be. We know it's going to increase. If there's a need for us to do more later, we can look at doing that as well. We spoke about the bus drivers earlier, in relation to an earlier question by, I think it was Mr. Ng Chee Meng, where there are bus drivers that indeed are not part of the existing package. We will work through the unions as soon as possible to provide support for this group. Thank you.
Mr. Ang Wei Nung.
PM and NT for announcing the good news to give targeted help to Singaporeans who are most affected by the Middle East crisis, especially the escalating fuel prices. I would first like to declare my interest as a head of company that leases out taxis, limousines, and private cars before asking clarification questions. In particular, I'm glad the government is giving $200 to platform workers such as food delivery personnel, taxi drivers, and private hire drivers. But we note that this $200 is given to all platform workers regardless of their driving hours. There is a full-time driver who drives more than 400 kilometers a day. Apparently will get the same $200 as compared to those who drive part-time or don't drive. Thus, I would like to ask if MOF and MOT will consider giving additional $100 or appropriate amount to drivers who drive more than 8 hours a day on average, for example. And I have a second clarification question, is that about MSF. Many Singaporeans receive financial assistance from Social Service Office or SSO will face a full brunt of the price increases or inflation. I would therefore ask whether MSF would review the quantum of financial assistance provided to mitigate the expected sharp rise in inflation in the next few months. Thank you.
Acting Minister Siow.
Mr. Speaker, let me take the first question by Mr. Ang on the $200. Well, we sized the $200 based on the average increase in fuel costs that taxi drivers as well as full-time taxi drivers as well as full-time private hire car drivers experienced in a month. The average is about $150 to $250. So we've chosen a number that's in the middle of that range. Of course, there are many drivers in the private hire car community that are not full-time drivers. They drive part-time for various reasons. So in some ways, the $200 is highest at the higher end of the range. In addition, we also note that NTUC as well as the LTA have been in discussions with the platform operators to provide support for these drivers, and they have given fuel vouchers in the last few weeks to the drivers that are affected. And we have also allowed for the fares of these services to also rise to accommodate some of these cost pressures. So overall, there is a holistic cost sharing. I think that's reasonable for now. We will continue to observe the situation. If there's a need for us to do more for this group, particularly the vulnerable ones, we will do so. Thank you.
MIS Go.
Mr. Speaker, responding to the member's question on Comcare, perhaps let me enlarge the question to address all lower-income families. I think the overall broad-based measures announced by MOF, be it the cost of living special payment or the USAVE rebates, although they benefit all households, but actually they proportionately, more than proportionately, advantage and benefit the lower-income families. So on this note, we think there is adequate support on that front. In terms of the overall Comcare, be it the short, medium term, or be it long-term assistance rates, we have revised the assistance rates about a year ago, April 2025, and during that last review, we've actually built in projected inflation. And based on what we have observed so far, we are still within the buffer, and therefore, we think the Comcare assistance rates, for now, suffice. In addition to that, earlier during the budget, during the Committee of Supplies debate, we also announced enhancements to Comlink Plus support. We've also pushed out the partnership payout, and through which we do want to encourage many of our low-income families, our Comlink Plus families, to come on board the Comlink Plus program. And with that, there's also a certain payout that can benefit our low-income families. Having said so, I just want to say we are cognizant that our low-income families are affected by cost of living increases disproportionately, and therefore are watching the situation very closely and will be ready to respond should there be a need to in the next few tranches. Perhaps also allow me to respond to a question that the member Haslina mentioned earlier. I think she was alluding to the fact that many of our social service agencies have very close feelers on the ground, and therefore they understand the challenges on the ground most acutely, where the needs are. Indeed, we agree that we want to better support our SSAs in terms of their work, because they are best able to deliver very targeted support to the households who need those support. We are working closely with the SSAs, and if there's a need to reinforce their work, reinforce the support that they get, we will do so. Thank you.
Mr. Mark Lee.
I thank the ministers for their very encouraging response, and it's heartening to actually know that the government has the resources and ability to maneuver, and as compared to many other countries. Sir, I have 4 supplementary questions. The first, many SMEs, particularly those with fixed price or longer-term contracts, lack the bargaining power to reprice quickly, even as energy, freight, and material costs rise. I'm glad to hear that Acting Minister Jeffrey Siow said the government is taking steps to adjust pricing in major infrastructure and BTO projects. This is an important signal to the private sector. Building on this approach, and as a businessman, with the importance of preserving contract sanctity, if the conflict continues to indefinitely and oil prices remain elevated, whether the government can work with and support trade associations and chambers by providing guidance, reference frameworks, or industry signals that facilitate fair and timely commercial renegotiation in exceptional circumstances. The second, many businesses should make use of this time to accelerate their shift to energy-efficient equipment. I'm glad to hear that the EEG grant is actually expanded to all sectors, and this is the right direction. But increasing the EEG quantum will help businesses move further, as pricing on the ground has changed significantly. Also, can we expand the business adaptation grant to include advisory services that can help businesses rethink and replan their business and processes to be more energy efficient? My third supplementary question is in relation to tightening credit conditions and rising working capital needs. Will the government consider recalibrating existing financing schemes, such as the Enterprise Financing Scheme, and where relevant, the Long-Term Investment Fund and the Private Credit Growth Fund, to better support SMEs facing such short-term liquidity pressures, particularly those managing volatility-driven costs, or even firms that want to take this chance to basically do more mergers and acquisitions. Finally, if USAVE helps household manage unavoidable utility costs, can the government consider a targeted equivalent for energy-exposed SMEs where utilities are similarly non-discretionary? Thank you.
Acting Minister Siow.
Mr. Speaker, I thank Mr. Mark Lee for his questions. First of all, we really understand the cash flow concerns of SMEs that are caught in this current energy crisis and the price spike. It is important, therefore, for us to get support to the SMEs as soon as possible. And that's the reason why we have decided the best way and the fastest way to get support to them is through the CIT rebates and through the cash grant to provide them support in terms of cash flow considerations. And we're able to disburse and start doing that from April onwards, which I think should help even in those cases that you mentioned about the contracts being locked in at fixed prices. Very much appreciative of the suggestion to involve the TACs to support and guide businesses to get through this difficult period. Certainly, on behalf of the economic agencies, we will work very closely with the TACs to do this. On the energy efficiency grant, as I mentioned earlier in response to another PQ, what we do want to do is to really get out the support soon. And so we did not want to make significant changes to the parameters, but this is something, increasing the quantum of the support is something we can consider at a later juncture. And similarly, we will look at also the business adaptation grant, which Mr. Lee suggested. On financing support, there are not a lot of signs today that the financing ecosystem has severely tightened up, but we will watch this very closely, and if that is the case, indeed we will then leverage on the existing schemes that we have to provide support to our companies. Finally, on the suggestions to have a USAFE scheme for companies, I think what we want to do is to, again, provide support to our companies broadly and quickly. We don't want to subsidize them necessarily too much on energy because that will blunt the price signals and slow down the process of encouraging these companies to continue to be energy self-sufficient. At a stage where I think it is very important for us to reinforce this message. We need to help companies, in fact, move through this transition phase quickly, continue to be energy self-sufficient, in fact, to be more energy self-sufficient if they can. Energy efficient, sorry, not self-sufficient, let me try that again. Energy efficient if they can. And through some of our schemes to encourage them to do so through buying more equipment and things like that, like, for example, through the energy efficiency grant. Thank you.
Ms. Elisa Chen.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm glad to know that we've put together a substantial first response and that the government has drawer plans to be deployed in the mid to long term to support Singaporeans. Beyond shorter-term measures, many in the broad middle are concerned about whether their wages can keep pace with a more volatile and uncertain economic and inflationary environment. Could the government share its plans to work with employers and unions to support sustainable wage growth and job security for mid-career and middle-income workers so that they do not slowly slip towards vulnerability over time? Going further, will the government keep track of economic stress indicators among the broad middle, such as rising unsecured debt, mortgage strain, or increased reliance on informal help? And how will these signals inform whether more calibrated support for this group is needed if the current Middle East situation drags on for longer than expected? Before my next SQ, I'd like to declare that I'm the Executive Director of a social service agency that serves children from lower-income families. Passengers such as lower-income shift workers, caregivers, and those in essential services often have the least flexibility to change their travel patterns when global events occur and fuel-linked costs rise, not just for public transport, but also for private hire transport. In its medium and longer-term plans for navigating this crisis and designing any transport-related interventions, how will the Ministry of Transport and the government ensure long-term affordability for lower-income or vulnerable transport relief to those with no realistic ability to substitute or reduce usage? Thank you.
Acting Minister Siow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the members' questions are very broad. They go beyond the scope of this current discussion we are having on the crisis, and I think it goes beyond the ministerial statement a little bit. But what I will just say is that these are important concerns for our government, and obviously from a government's point of view, we will continue to work on these issues to make sure that we have a society that is well supported and that their needs are all well met. Specifically on her question on public transport, or rather transport affordability, especially for families, we do have a comprehensive system to support lower income Singaporeans in terms of their transport needs. Today, public transport is very affordable. It is at, I believe, 2% of the average household income for the P30, if I'm not mistaken. But more importantly, if there are people who cannot afford transport, we will find ways to support them. Even for large families who need to take private hire vehicles, we have additional subsidies that we have worked into through the Life SG large families credit. I believe that's what it's called. And overall, we will continue to make sure that transportation is affordable for all Singaporeans. Thank you.
Mr. Louis Chua.
Thank you, Speaker. So 2 sets of clarifications. The first is, if you look at the fuel prices, of course, petrol prices have gone up by 20% and diesel 70%. And for the diesel vehicles, most are actually commercial vehicles. So in this regard, if you look at the impact to sole proprietorships or micro and small SMEs, I think the impact could be quite hard. And in the spirit of not using blunt tools, I was wondering if there are specific measures to small businesses that actually have diesel vehicles to actually mitigate the impact of higher fuel costs. I do note the point about the enhanced CIT rebate, and if you look at the cash grant component, it has been increased to about 2,000, basically an increase of $500. But if some estimates have it that just the monthly fuel cost increase for one diesel van alone is already $172 a month. The second is that I think Minister Tan last month have encouraged all of us to conserve energy. I think DPM and PM have also said the same. But if I look at the electricity demand in Singapore, households represent just about 6% of electricity demand based on the latest numbers. So in this regard, in terms of looking at the industrial and commercial users, which is the overwhelming use of energy demand, what specific measures are there to kind of have targeted measures to encourage these companies to step up on their minimum energy efficiency standards or energy conservation kind of measures? Thank you.
Acting Minister Siow.
Mr. Speaker, I've spoken earlier about removing or doing something about the diesel tax and helping with diesel expenses. I'll just add a little bit more to the answer. I think that even if we do cut diesel tax duties, it might not necessarily pass through fully to the end consumer. And so therefore, it is not really the best way to try to convey help directly to the people who need it the most. More importantly, as I said earlier, we don't want to blunt the price signals and reduce the incentive for a longer-term objective, which is to encourage actually businesses to switch to more energy-efficient modes of transport, as well as to be more efficient in how they use their vehicles. Thank you.
Mr. Patrick Tay.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I have 2 questions for the Minister for Health. Firstly, it's with the rise in energy and related costs, especially it will impact our public healthcare clusters. How would MOH be mitigating this so that some of these costs are not passed on to consumers, therefore inflating and exacerbating healthcare prices and costs? The second question is whether, in light of the current situation, is there any impact on whether it's a stockpile or supply of critical medicines or maybe certain specialty areas?
Minister Wong.
Yeah, we're back to the first bucket. The impact of the disruption, there's an immediate impact, which is the kind of supply we procure that comes through the Straits of Hormuz. One ingredient is helium, and I explained earlier, impact is not big because we don't take our helium from there. Second is some medical supplies, but our medical supplies that come through the Straits of Hormuz is very low, well below 1% of our medical supplies. And medical supplies, in turn, about 12% of our total healthcare costs. So the impact is not significant. And there's no tap on our stockpiles. But I think what we need to watch out for is the secondary domino effect. Because you think about it, if petrochemical products are disrupted, then the ingredients to make gloves, syringes will be affected. Korea is affected because they make their own syringes. We import from suppliers, so for now we're not affected. If chemicals used to make drug substances are impacted, then drug suppliers will be impacted. So the global supply chain is actually not a chain, but it's a very intricate web. And we need to monitor those downstream domino effect. As of now, I think our response is, because immediate impact is not significant, the current response should be to maintain our stockpile, especially the essential supplies, watch our usage, minimize wastage, work with our trusted suppliers, and we got very good relationships with them, and then judge the moment to activate other contingency plans if and when they are needed.
Ms. Denise Poh.
Honorable, and I think Minister Jeffrey has mentioned that essential services, temporary assistance to be provided for those who need them for essential services, and also co-funding will be given as well. For many of this group of vulnerable, for example, the elderly, disabled, the younger disabled, those who are in special schools and so forth, they have very little alternative in terms of transport mode. And if the measures, I worry that if the measures are too blunt, too low, or even after co-funding, then the service providers who chose to provide services, essential services or transport services for this group might choose to exit. And that's something that we don't want to see because it does create more hardship. So I want to ask if the relevant ministries, for example, MOE, MSF, MOH, who are dealing with this, supporting this group, if they could, before they make their final decision, announce them, can you do a bit more detailed study in terms of the impact, and perhaps look at tiering some of these measures before announcing them, and provide also a space to have flexibility for those who are truly undergoing hardship or will create hardship for those, to protect the vulnerable who have little alternatives, and also to preserve those service providers who have other alternatives to make money, but choose to serve this group of vulnerable people. So for consideration, please.
Acting Minister Siow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we fully agree with Ms. Denise Poh's exhortation. Indeed, we want to absolutely ensure that these critical services continue to be operated for the vulnerable, and then on behalf of those agencies that you mentioned, we will make sure that we take care of the vulnerable and the services continue to be run. And we will consult all relevant stakeholders to make sure that this is so. Thank you.
Mr. Kenneth Yong. I'm sorry, MOS, go.
I just wanted to add that at this current juncture, as we speak, MOF together with MOE, MSF, as well as MOH actually are working on the details, following up from what has been disseminated today. And if I may, I'll ask them to, perhaps if you have any feedback, you can relay to us, and then we can perhaps work into the details. Perhaps I just want to share that in addition to, especially for some of our persons with disabilities, in addition to what's been announced today, actually, earlier at the Committee of Supply last year, we've actually announced enhanced enabling transport subsidy provisions. And these provisions actually will commence from July this year. So I think the timeliness of it should allow us to provide increased subsidy rates as well as expanded coverage for families. My understanding is that for PCHI up to 4,800 from July onwards, they will be covered. So I think this hopefully will come at a good time, whereby it provides additional support for some of these families that we are speaking about. Thank you.
Mr. Kenneth Yong.
Thanks, Speaker. SingStat publishes retail prices and what consumers pay at the end.
I'm not sure we track the full cost structure behind the prices, domestic supply chain margins, domestic transport, wholesale margins, retail margins, etc. So if we don't have a baseline understanding of cost structure before the prices rise further, we won't be able to tell later whether a price increase was done by genuine cost pressures or by margin expansion. So will the government establish baseline cost structure data now for key categories such as food, transport and energy companies, especially the retail-facing ones?
DPM Gan.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to explain that we operate in our economy in a very competitive manner. We just want to make sure that in our retail market and wholesale market, we have sufficient competition to allow businesses to operate in a competitive way. This way is the best way to ensure that our prices are reasonable, and those who are taking advantage of the market to try to raise their prices, there will be competitors. They will compete with him to offer alternatives, and this is the best way to ensure that our prices are always reasonable and competitive. And our Competitive Commission, Competition and Consumer Commission will continue to monitor and to carry out surveillance in the market to ensure that the market in different areas, whether it's retail, wholesale, whether it's food or energy or any other commodity, we will make sure that there is sufficient competition, and if there is a lack of competition, then the Commission will intervene where necessary.
Mr. Victor Lai.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm sure many Singaporean vulnerable households and businesses are grateful for the short-term measures that we have announced and brought forward. But as we know, it will never be enough, and there will always be opportunities to do more. At the recent residents' dialogue, I came across some opinions that the crisis is not that severe, having seen other countries where they have had fuel shortages and even electricity supply cuts. This is something that we need to be mindful of, and I'm very heartened that among the residents, the younger generation made some very interesting suggestions that perhaps the government can go beyond a crisis and then a money solution, to go beyond money to rally our people. This is a crisis forced not just on Singapore but across the whole world, and perhaps the government can consider some measures to bring our people together nationally so that they feel they can also do their part to contribute. For example, to conserve electricity in a more objective way. So can the government consider a campaign to bring our Singaporeans together to contribute to this solution over and above just money being given out? Thank you.
DPM Gan.
Thank you. I want to thank Mr. Victor Lai for his suggestion. Indeed, communication and engagement is an important part of the work of the committee, and we do want to reach out to also take this opportunity to re-emphasize the importance of conservation and to also share with Singaporeans the situation regularly so that they are updated on the situation that we are facing. This is indeed a crisis, and it is indeed a crisis that's serious enough for us to set up the Homefront Crisis Ministerial Committee to oversee this whole of government effort to manage the crisis. And today we have a ministerial statement also signifies the importance of this crisis situation. And this is something that we hope to be able to reach out to our people. And your suggestion about campaigns and exercises is something that we will consider where practical and where it's meaningful. We'll be happy to work with community organizations, we work with schools, we will work with trade association to see how we can continue to re-emphasize this message of a crisis situation, and that we need to do our part to continue to conserve all our resources, energy, food, water, and all the important resources.
Ms. Lee Hui-ying.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
In Budget 2016, there was a one-year freeze in foreign worker levy for the marine and processed sectors due to the oil price downturn. So 10 years on, we now face a global oil price surge. So many sectors, especially the construction sector, that rely heavily on diesel for logistics and transport, now face doubling or even tripling of business operating costs. So will the government consider a temporary freeze of foreign worker levy to affected sectors, especially the construction sector? This will directly help to offset the impact of rising costs. And if the crisis prolongs, would there be alternative support measures to help these businesses manage this cost as well? This include businesses who manage private contracts who will not be able to benefit from BCA's co-sharing of fuel costs for key government projects. Thank you.
Acting Minister Siow, or rather, Minister Tan.
I think that at this particular point in time, we are monitoring the situation very closely. Our first priority would be to support all of our fresh graduates who are graduating. We are also concerned about the potential of AI disruptions on fresh graduates looking and landing jobs. What we hope to be able to achieve in our graduated tiering of the workers' levies is to drive productivity, drive value addedness in many of these construction companies and many of the SMEs and companies that are employing these foreign workers. Just by cutting away the levy completely without any concomitant tie backs to increasing productivity and value addedness, I think we're going to set ourselves backwards. Thank you.
Mr. Azhar Othman.
Thank you, Speaker. A couple of clarification and suggestion, if I may. Looking at the criticalness of the situation, will the government imposing a curb of transportation use or private transportation use as what other countries has been deploying in Malaysia and Indonesia? The whole idea is to, of course, to reduce our consumption and, of course, plan further when the urgency is needed. That's number one. Number two is that if you look at the energy efficiency grant, and if we are relying on households to reduce their consumption, if I may recommend that we reward for reduce of consumption, because only then the value of using energy more efficiently are being taken into account. So if typically their consumption is $100 a month and they manage to reduce by $20, and a certain percentage of that can be returned back to them as a reward for that. I think that put Singaporean in a context of using energy wisely in terms of how we can encourage, the efficiency of consumption. And thirdly, looking at this situation of energy dependency, it's critical. I think it is important to ensure we are energy independent. And if I can ask the ministry on how serious and how this situation expedite the possibility of deployment of small modular reactor or nuclear energy in the context of being independent. Thank you so much.
Minister Tan first, then Acting Minister Siow. Minister Tan first.
On the acceleration, the last point from the member about the deployment of a small modular reactor, I believe I've answered it quite extensively. Perhaps just to reiterate, we're doing everything we can. We have done, we have actually shared with everyone here about the 4 switches in terms of the diversification of our energy source to achieve some measure of energy independence. First, of course, natural gas. Second, solarization. We have exceeded our targets 5 years ahead of time. We hit the 2 gigawatt peak last year, ahead of the 2030 target that we set for ourselves. So now we are going to raise that ambition to 3 gigawatt peak by 2030, 50% more. And we are hoping to accelerate that solar power adoption here, to double that for last year to 4 gigawatt peak by the second half of the 2030s. Now, we have gone on this Decarbonization Grand Challenge, which was approved at Budget COS this year, to look for low carbon technologies to try to see how we can use biomethane as a sandbox. So we're trying everything there is, including even exploring geothermal. And of course, the last bit is a question of waiting for the first of a kind to be operational and to be deployed and to be safe before we start to adopt. And we want to be the fastest adopter. We have sent our teams, we've seconded them to learn from the US. Our teams have gone to the US multiple times to look at the different centers in Idaho, in Oak Ridge, and in Boston as well. At the same time, we have tie-ups with UAE. Of course, at this particular point in time, no one is there from our side. We have also signed with the Koreans, with the Japanese, with UK, to learn from them, and the French, to learn from them on some of these advanced nuclear technologies. And we are also working very closely with the IAEA to see how we can self-evaluate the INIR one. And we will keep this House posted very regularly on the accelerated pathways that we have adopted to reach that energy independence. Those are the measures that I've articulated many, many times. Now, to your point about whether we should consider rationing, right? Rationing power use, for instance. We are contemplating, very early days, we don't want to cause panic because we're actually stable. We also don't want to cause panic to investors, to the world economy, to our downstream partner countries whom we export refined products to. But at some point in time, as part and parcel of either Total Defense Day, we may do an exercise to test out the readiness when it comes to power rationing. I mean, if I may borrow your time, since we're here, you are all respectively advisors of your constituencies, your GRCs, and so on. If you can adopt energy-saving measures across your entire GRC, we would really welcome. And I want to have a shout out to Senior Parliamentary Secretary Sean. I think in his constituency, he adopted energy-saving motion sensor lighting in the HDB blocks. Now, to also address the member Louis' point about the fact that domestic use is a very small amount, but it hits the pocket. And we are starting a multi-pronged approach, not just the domestic users that we're encouraging to conserve energy. We are also working with big businesses to get them, to incentivize them to switch, whether it's the resource, the REGE, the energy efficiency grant, to get them to take on these things. We are encouraging contemporaneously our domestic users to use the climate vouchers if they're not used to switch the aircon appliances from the 3-tick to the 5-tick ones, which saves them considerable amount of money every year, about something like $300. So we are trying on multiple prongs to get our population, our businesses, our country, our society as a whole to adopt energy conservation as its core, as its foundation. Thank you.
Acting Minister Siow.
Mr. Speaker, just to reply very quickly to the member's suggestion on curbing private transport use, and in fact, that's the very reason why we do not want to reduce diesel or fuel taxes and duties. But our context is quite different from other countries. We are, as Dr. Tan explained, we are not facing a shortage of fuel. What we are facing are high fuel prices, and that in itself should be an incentive for people to drive less and maybe, hopefully, to use public transport more. I would just want to add very quickly that the situation that we have is a position of strength. It's not by accident. You know, we are here, fortunate that we are discussing how to cope with higher fuel prices rather than discussing whether we are running out of fuel. As DPM and Minister Shan explained, we built our position as an energy trading hub over decades. That was a long-term move. We maintained strategic fuel reserves precisely because we anticipated supply disruptions, and we don't control prices. We allow the price mechanism to function so that energy is priced properly in Singapore and used efficiently. And all this is deliberate. It allows us to be in a strong position to act, not just react, so that we are able to cope with these crises. And it's all because we have a good government that's prepared, anticipates problems, and plans ahead for the future. Thank you.
Acting Minister Siow, I recalled earlier there was a question by Mr. Saktiandi Supat. We agreed to defer it to this. You might want to respond to his earlier question.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, let me do that. Mr. Saktiandi asked about two things. One is whether or not the inflationary impact can be mitigated with our use of our exchange rate policy, our monetary policies. And to that end, indeed, MAS will look at this as part of its regular review of monetary policies. And I think we will see what they will intend to do in the coming months. As to whether we want to, I think his other question was about off-budget measures and whether or not we have plans to do that. As I explained in my speech, we do have drawer plans. If the situation changes and if needed, we will indeed activate them and bring them together as off-budget measures if needed. Thank you.
Ms. Nadia Samdin.
Thank you, Speaker. On assurances to households, I'd like to appeal for my second question earlier on national food stockpile to please be answered. Thank you.
SMS Zaki.
I thank the member for a question. This was an earlier bucket. And on national food stockpile, I think this is important because I just want to assure Singaporeans that we do have sufficient stockpiles. We are constantly calibrating and assessing the current situation. And certainly at this point in time, there is no need to activate the stockpiles. I'm not at liberty to give too much details on what it is because this is as part of national security. I think we want to keep that on our own books. But having said that, I think we're in a better position today, having had learned from COVID, from the last energy crisis, to be able to diversify our sources. Today we have about 180 countries and regions that we have among our agreements today where we import food sources. So that enables us to diversify, divert food imports when necessary. Earlier I also shared that the amount of food imports through the Strait of Hormuz was just less than 0.5%. So hence, today while we're not impacted, while we're not likely to see food disruptions in the short term, but we cannot fully insulate ourselves either from increases in food prices as a result of increases such as fertilizers and other food inputs. So I think this is where a lot of the measures are covered by MOF earlier. I think provides assurance in the short term that government is looking into this, we are monitoring the situation. And I can assure members too that perhaps, like Mr. Victor Lai has suggested earlier, make this a learning moment. If I can also pitch for our local farmers and local production, this is also a time for us to build our local capabilities, our local farming resilience. Because for us to also look into buying local produce, that helps our farms to increase capacity at this point, helps them build resilience over time. And should there be disruption or should there be a need for us to divert supplies or look to ramp up local production, I think they're in a better position if we do what we can today to support them too. So this is, I think, one learning moment that we can do, and I hope that the community can come forth and support our local farmers this round. Thank you.
Ms. Joan Pereira.
Speaker, one clarification. Will there be any plans to provide targeted support like rental or utility rebates for our hawkers and our stall holders as they strive to continue providing affordable meals for Singaporeans? Thanks.
Who's going to respond to this? SMS Zaki.
I think on the hawker front, we keep our rentals, as low as possible to sustain our hawkers. But I think for food prices, I think we continue to monitor. I think my colleague, Ms. Gan Siow, has mentioned about how we're monitoring food supply, food prices. And I think that will continue to do so. I think the current measures, I think, are what we look at in terms of CDC vouchers and special payments. I think that's where, we look to support households in the meantime, and we will keep everyone posted should there be changes. But rest assured, we're monitoring, we're engaging our hawkers. We will try to keep prices as competitive and low as possible, but I can't guarantee that there will not be
food price increase as a result of, as I shared earlier, food prices, and we are importing most of our food supply in, so we're not insulated against food hikes or prices as a result of the global situation right now. Thank you.
Ms. Pereira.
I was wondering whether there could be some support like rental or utility rebates for them.
Mr. Speaker, as I shared, we are monitoring the situation. At this point, there is no, government's monitoring at this point. There's no need at this point juncture because we've not seen the price hikes hit the hawkers in the same way as, as yet. So there will be downstream impact. I think that's quite sure. I think we've already had enough explanation, elaborations from the MTI colleagues on energy prices hikes at this point. I think we are still in stable mode. So if the need arises, rest assured that the ministry will provide the necessary assistance as required. Thank you so much.
Mr. David Ho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two clusters of questions and one suggestion. The first directed to MOE. With rising input costs, how might this translate into food prices in our school canteens? Will MOE work with storeholders to monitor and manage price increase? And should there be any price adjustment, would this be communicated to parents? Because what I hear from parents is that so that they are able to make informed decisions to adjust pocket money for their children. The second cluster of question relates to MOT. In my interaction with private hires with Moss Rahayu recently, many of them raised concerns about the fuel costs. And with this $200 support, it will help to cushion these pressures. I would like to clarify whether if this is intended as a one-off measure, or would we be seeing this as a more sustained periodic support until fuel prices stabilize at an acceptable amount. Third, it's on a suggestion. One thing I've learned in my role and caring for Clementi residents is that in times of need and time of fear and crisis, scammers will leverage on this to tell our residents to do things that will put them in a vulnerable position. So my suggestion is, could we also in this period of time also increase our advisory on scams, and also for all of us as we interact with our residents to let them know to be mindful for any advisories that come to them, that they should always double check and also dial 1799 for any clarification.
For MOE, who's going to respond? MOS Law.
I thank the member for the question. On the question for MOE on canteen storeholders, we are monitoring the utilities costs for them, and if need be, we will take a look at how we can come in to support some of them. I think we are also mindful that currently there are fee guidelines for the prices of the food in our school canteens, and therefore any increases in the utilities or ingredients costs would have to be borne by many of our students and their families as well. But as Acting Minister Jeff has mentioned, we will do our part to provide financial assistance to the students who need them most. Thank you.
Acting Minister Siow.
Mr. Speaker, on private hire car drivers, to $200 currently is a one-off, but we will watch how things develop, and if there's a need for us to do more, we can come in again. But more importantly, if fuel prices continue to remain elevated at this price for a long period of time, actually the market ought to accommodate it in the form of higher fares, which will then, consumers have to adjust their behaviors, including consumption. I think that's the best way to do it, rather than try to blunt the price signals by giving them a long-term fuel subsidy. Thank you.
SMS soon.
Mr. Speaker, earlier member Ms. Joan Pereira had a question with regards to rental costs and hawker food prices. That was addressed by SMS Saki. But I also thought that in relation to what she asked, another area where people might be concerned about could be HDB coffee shops, because that is also where they buy their meals. I'd like to share that during COVID-19, HDB had provided additional assistance such as rental waivers for HDB rental shops. HDB had also considered appeals from tenants who are facing financial hardship or poor business conditions by granting installment payment plans. So if like what SMS Zaki said, we would monitor the situation, and if there's a need for us to sync up what we do with regards to rental costs to help with how hawkers or coffee shop operators are doing, then we will do so. Thank you.
I'm going to move to the third bucket on security and related matters. Ms. Mariam Jaffa.
Thank you, Speaker. I wanted to follow up on the thrust of my PQs 15 and 62. First, clarification, could the Minister please clarify whether the government is planning on the basis that the current disruptions are temporary, or are we entering into a period of structurally more permanent, more volatile global environment? Secondly, in adapting to these shifts, what are the key trade-offs that the government is managing? For example, between resilience and cost competitiveness, someone has to pay for resilience, or between targeted support and more broad-based coverage. Could the Minister provide specific indications on the thresholds that the government is monitoring, not in the context of price caps, as Ms. Gan addressed earlier, but energy prices, duration of disruptions, cost increases in certain sectors? What would trigger a shift in the policy response? And lastly, beyond the tactical immediate stabilization measures, what are the longer-term structural changes that the government is considering? I think taking into account that we do have the structuring committee recommendations that are also coming out, but what are the current assessments on the biggest gaps or limitations that the government may have in terms of policies as we shift to a more, I guess, permanently volatile environment? Whether that could be, and I ask this in the context of both, being resilient in a defensive way, but also in an offensive way. So, do current policies are great at making it easy to do business, but do we need to shift more to, for example, thinking about how we assess risks or how we share risks as well as rewards in a more volatile environment? Thank you.
DPM Gan. Although it's back to bucket one.
Not quite. I think this is regarding security and long-term strategy. I will be happy to answer. First and foremost, I think this crisis is temporary in a sense, and all crises are temporary, but I think the impact of this crisis will be quite long-lasting. First, it reminds us that the geopolitical situation landscape has changed, and it's important for us to understand the implications of that, and that also relates to your second question with regard to a trade-off between resilience and cost. I think many years ago, our focus has been efficiency, our focus has been in cost effectiveness and just-in-time delivery and production. But I think over the last few years, with multiple crises that we have been confronted with, including COVID-19 and now this oil crisis, energy crisis, it reminds us that it's not just about just in time, it's also just in case. So therefore, it's important for us, therefore, to review our policy, our strategy, our approach to ensure a carefully calibrated balance between resilience and at the same time competitiveness. There will always be trade-offs in terms of cost if you want to have a greater security. I think even in today's world, when we talk about energy security, we talk about stockpile for our energy requirement. Stockpile will cost money, and even if we enter into long-term contracts will also have a premium versus a spot market in a situation when there's a volatility. At the same time, when we look at the cost increase as a result of disruption in supply chain, it's something that we also have to to always bear in mind. And if we talk about the security for our oil-dependent sectors, particularly our refineries, we talk about the access to crude and the need for us to explore alternative sources, and we talk about supplies from outside Middle East, which will be more costly and take longer to deliver. All these are balances that we need to recalibrate in response to the changing environment in the geopolitical outlook. At the same time, we talk about the long-term strategy. What should we do? We have already set up the Economic Strategy Committee, and they're finishing their work, and the report will be released shortly. And in that work, we focus on how we can strengthen Singapore's resilience, economic resilience, so that it's not only to respond to crisis, but to respond to long-term changes in the global economic structure. This will include our emphasis on AI to give us that edge and that leg up against our competitors. If we are able to move fast, decisively into embracing AI and adopting AI and becoming an AI leader, I think that will give us an added competitive edge versus our competition. At the same time, I also talk about in my speech earlier that we need to continue to strengthen our partnership with our like-minded partners, other countries, other economies, to see how we can cooperate and create more space for us. And by international cooperation, that would also strengthen our economic resilience. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach. It's not a single strategy, but all this what we are putting in place. But I also need to remind all of us that these strategies must continue to evolve and change because the global environment is changing all the time. So we cannot stay static, and the ESC report will not be the final review of our economy. I think it's an ongoing process. We just have to keep running. Hopefully, we run slightly faster than our competitors. Thank you.
Mr. Jerugam.
So in light of the conflict since 28 February, has the government detected any uptick in opportunistic or geopolitically motivated cyber attacks targeting our critical energy or information infrastructure? And will it be stepping up our cyber defense stance above the baseline level during this period? Secondly, during the Prime Minister's recent meeting with his Australian and New Zealand counterparts, the focus was on securing long-term LNG supplies. Given that 43% of our gas still comes via regional pipelines, has there been a similar high-profile public ministerial level mission to Jakarta and Kuala Lumpur to specifically secure these essential energy lifelines? And if so, has Singapore received formal assurances that existing piped natural gas export contracts will be fully honored despite escalating domestic industrial demands?
Minister Tan.
We constantly engage our counterparts for piped natural gas, Malaysia and Singapore. I believe you would have read in the news that both our Prime Ministers, Prime Minister Wong and Prime Minister Anwar, they've been in phone calls as well. I make trips. I meet them at international forums, and every opportunity that we have, we discuss how to collaborate more between the whole ASEAN member state framework and also the fact that we are the closest neighbors. For Australia, because of the just like the other ASEAN member state, because of the interdependence, given our position as a global hub and particularly a Southeast Asia hub for refineries, our downstream products are equally in demand. Just like their natural gas is also equally in demand by us. So I think that mutual dependency serves both or on a multilateral basis well, and we continue to build on those. Of course, to further expand that collaboration, to further expand the uptake, I think that is also a function of the amount of private sector investments that we need to bring alongside with us, because typically when it comes to the actual negotiation for the pricing, we typically don't get involved, and we leave it to the B2B sector to be involved in that direct negotiation. Those are the measures that we have today, and I believe that it has served us well all these decades. Of course, like what DPM has just shared, the world is also changing rapidly. Right now, everyone is looking at just in case. I believe that as a result of this particular crisis, some degree of scarring is bound to happen. And there will be countries who will start to hoard as well. But I think for us, we continue to remain clear-headed, consistent in the way we deal with all of our neighbors and with all of our partners. We continue to be transparent and maintain our credibility. I believe that it's not just working within the ASEAN framework, it's also working with Northeast Asia partners, Japan, ROK, China, working with Oceania, which is Australia, New Zealand, working with the Middle East, because at some point in time, this crisis will also abate. And of course, opening up new markets. That has always been what we have been carrying out all this while.
Minister Teo.
Mr. Speaker, the member asked a question about Singapore's cyber defense posture. When a conflict of this nature takes place, naturally we have to watch out for potential vectors of attack, even if Singapore is not directly involved in the theatre of action. Having said that, I think there is another type of risk that we have to watch out for even more, and that is the risk of misinformation and disinformation that could threaten our social cohesion, where narratives are being put forward that polarize not only the countries that are directly involved in a conflict, but also have a spillover effect on Singapore. So with regards to what we are watching out for, yes, cyber defense, but at the same time, misinformation, disinformation that could also give rise to tensions within our society. So I would just respond as follows.
Minister Balakrishnan, would you like to respond to Mr. Fadli Fauzi's earlier question?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. Singapore's position on straits used for international navigation is long-standing and consistent. The Straits of Hormuz, just like the Straits of Malacca and the Straits of Singapore, are examples of straits used for international navigation. No ifs, no buts, no questions as far as we're concerned. It is so. Now, what is the international law position on these types of straits? And the position is quite clear. There is a right of transit passage. A right of transit passage. It's not a privilege to be granted by the bordering state. It's not a license to be supplicated for. It is not a toll to be paid. It is a right of all nations' ships to traverse. This right is enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, of which obviously Singapore is a signatory and has ratified. Article 44 of UNCLOS imposes a direct and an unambiguous obligation on states bordering these international straits. And let me quote, it states, quote, states bordering straits shall not hamper transit passage, unquote. It also goes on to state there shall be no suspension of transit passage. There's no exception for security, there's no exception for environment, there's no exception for war. Singapore also takes position that this right of transit passage is also part of customary international law. And in case you're wondering why I'm nitpicking about customary international law, it's because there are some other states that may have signed but have not ratified UNCLOS. And I'm stating that so that I'm telling you this is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for states that have not ratified UNCLOS. So we have been closely monitoring the situation in the Straits of Hormuz. The Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore remains in close contact with the ship owners, as well as the operators of Singapore-flagged or Singapore-registered ships in the Straits, in the Persian Gulf. At both the international and regional levels, our agencies are engaging with the stakeholders to explore potential opportunities to facilitate safe transit of the ships. And don't forget, there's also a humanitarian issue for the workers, for the maritime sailors on board these ships. And this includes engaging the International Maritime Organization and the member states on the potential establishment of a safe maritime corridor following the 36th extraordinary session of the IMO Council. In addition, we're also engaging regional counterparts on other possible arrangements that may be explored. You may be wondering why I'm taking such a legal and strict definition. And it's not because I'm particularly obsessed with law, but because the Straits of Malacca, the Straits of Singapore, is in fact another critical choke point. You may be aware that, in fact, if you add up all the maritime oil, crude and refined, you might be surprised that actually more flows through the Straits of Malacca and Singapore than even the Straits of Hormuz. If you think about global trade, container trade, there's far more flowing through this place. And the most important geographical fact, which most people are not aware of, the narrowest point in the Straits of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles. Guess what the narrowest point in the Straits of Singapore is? It's less than 2 nautical miles. So do you understand now why we have to take a categorical position that international law and UNCLOS is the constitution of the oceans, and this is a right. Freedom of navigation as a right and not a privilege for ships and planes. And this is of profound importance to Singapore. So to your specific question, yes, I have engaged with the Iranian foreign minister before the war. And yes, I'm sure I will engage him in the near future. But as a matter of principle, and not because we're taking sides, I cannot engage in negotiations for safe passage of ships or negotiate on toll rates, because to do so would be implicitly eroding this legal principle. So again, this is another example of Singapore upholding principle, not taking sides. The larger geostrategic backdrop to this is, whether you realize it or not, the world has become more violent and more volatile. And there is a price to be paid for that. Second, what the Straits of Hormuz has shown is that even in this digital age, choke points and physical delivery still matter. And the third point which we need to register in Singapore is that it's not enough to be an oasis of safety, security, cohesion, wealth, and even having the military ability to protect ourselves. Because if our region is aflame, and with war and missiles flying, no oasis can be safe. The upshot of these three observations is that there is an insurance premium to be paid. So let's be upfront with our people explain the dangers, no sugar coating, explain what needs to be done, including paying that insurance premium. So you need to alert our people, but not be alarmists. And we have to walk that fine tightrope.
Associate Professor Kenneth Goh.
Thank you, Speaker. I just have a question to the government about medical supplies. How vulnerable are our supply chains for medical products and pharmaceuticals, and how sensitive are these? How price sensitive are these products given the current crisis? Thank you.
Looks like we are going back to bucket 2. I thought this was actually answered by Minister Ong earlier. But
That's
DPM
right.
Gun, if you want to...
That's right. I was just standing up to say that that question has been answered by Minister Ong already.
So please, members, if it's already been asked, please do not ask again. It's your duty to stay in the chamber throughout the ministerial statement. Mr. Azhar Othman.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to request a question regarding security. Looking at our situation right now, it's not that dire, but taking a worst-case scenario, every country tends to look on itself, tend to look inwards. What's the possibility of country that agreed to supply gas to us suddenly said, I can't, I have to supply to my side first? And what are the situation we're taking in terms of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs relation to them, in terms of our position of supporting our supply to our own Singaporeans? So maybe I get some clarification on that, please. Thank you.
Minister Tan.
Mr. Speaker, sir, in a crisis like this, I understand the angst, the apprehension of everyone, not just in this chamber, but outside. I think there are actually many, many different ifs. I cannot possibly cover every perceivable permutation or conceivable combination that can come up. As I said, that is why we maintain the stockpile the way we have maintained. We have taken it upon ourselves to make sure that we have provided contingencies for different scenarios, from single geographical chokes to multiple geographical chokes. And we have sized up, based on the constraints of our own land size, whether it is single geographical choke to multiple geographical, that length of time that is required. And as what CMNS, which is Coordinating Minister for National Security, opened up earlier on, we are going to increase that stockpile some more. I think for us, we have done every possible measure. We have taken it upon ourselves to open up every single possible diversification measure possible and available to us today. And if, to your point, what if these countries decide to curtail back the gas supply? Today, there are legal provisions that are enshrined. Of course, people can renege everything. I mean, you're talking about a sort of a Z scenario where everything happens and there are burning platforms everywhere. I assure you that even at that point in time, we have made provisions. Of course, how long can we survive if everything is taken away? I think that is something that I cannot share with you. And everyone here would understand why I'm not at liberty to share this with you. I hope that the House can appreciate the very delicate balance we are all in today and how we should all be working closely together as one united nation. Thank you.
Mr. Lee Hong Chun.
Hi, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, I have two questions. One question in bucket 2, one question in bucket 3. But in view of time, I will send the question in bucket 2 to MOS Jeffrey, so he'll look at it, more for the logistics sector. While my question in bucket 3 is regarding to what Min Vivian has just mentioned, Strait of Hormuz is undeniably important to Singapore and the wider region due to its role in the global energy flow. I believe Strait of Malacca is even more critical to us. As one of the world's busiest shipping lanes and a key artery for trade, any disruption that would have immediate and far-reaching consequences for Singapore economics and supply chains. This raises an important question for all of us. Has our government fully internalized the lesson from potential vulnerability in such strategic choke points? In particular, are we sufficiently prepared for a scenario where the Strait of Malacca is disrupted, whether through geopolitical tension, blockages, or other crises? And do we have robust contingency plan to mitigate the impact?
Minister Tan.
The answer is yes.
With that, we have had almost 3.5 hours of debate on this ministerial statement. I think all clarifications have been sought and answered sometimes more than once. With that, order, end of ministerial statements.